Loyalty is unilateral until tested. Most of your life runs on a private assumption. You already know who would show up for you: a best friend of 10 years, a partner who promised forever, a parent who raised you. The decision feels locked in, settled, safe. Loyalty deposited like money in a bank account that will always be there. But betrayal erases that illusion in a single moment. Loyalty isn't something you can possess or store. It's a choice remade in real time, in the exact second when staying costs something real: a promotion, a comfortable lie, a relationship they don't want to lose, sleep they need. Until that moment arrives, you're living in a story, not a fact. The cruelty isn't just the betrayal itself, it's the discovery that everything you thought was already decided was actually still being decided every day without you knowing the question was even open. They were loyal when it was easy, when showing up didn't require anything from them. Loyalty without cost is just convenience with a better name. Once you've watched someone step sideways when the real test came, when comfort won and you lost, you stop assuming permanence. You become quieter about trust, maybe colder, but also clearer about what loyalty actually is. A verb, not an identity. It only means something on the day someone chooses it when they didn't have to. Silence is how people abandon you. You keep waiting for the explosion, the fight, the speech, the moment they tell you it's over. But loyal people rarely leave that way. They leave in the slow fade, the one that happens while they're still sitting across from you. Texts that used to come within minutes now take hours. Conversations that ran until 2 a.m. get cut short by one-word replies. They show up to plans, say the right things, but something in their voice has dimmed. No confrontation, no clean break, no moment where you can point and say, "There, that's when it ended." Just a gradual turning down of the brightness until the screen is technically still on, but almost nobody's home. And here's where the knife twists. You start blaming yourself for noticing. Maybe they're just stressed. Maybe you're reading into things. Maybe you did something and they're too decent to throw it back in your face. But betrayal teaches you something sharp. Silence isn't kindness. It's the opposite of loyalty. A person who actually values you, even when they're furious or ready to walk, will tell you something. They'll name the hurt. They'll fight, cry, argue if they have to. Anything but leave you guessing inside a relationship that's already ended. That slow motion exit, the one where you're left aching and wondering if the connection was ever real, that's a deliberate choice. It's abandonment dressed up as gentleness. And once you've lived it, you spot it everywhere. You don't waste months wondering what shifted. You just know when loyalty dies quietly, you're left haunted by something worse than anger. You're left with doubt about whether you ever mattered at all. The cruel part is that doubt lingers longer than any fight would have. Trust is a loan, not a gift. Think back to the moment you first trusted someone who later broke it. You handed them something precious, your openness, your vulnerability, maybe your secrets, expecting nothing in return because that's what love or friendship is supposed to feel like: free, pure. But betrayal teaches you the brutal truth nobody warns you about. Trust was never a gift at all. It was a loan you extended without terms, without collateral, without any legal document that said they had to pay it back. The real sting isn't even that they took the loan. It's that you never actually meant it as a loan in the first place. You meant it as a permanent transfer of your faith, a one-way door. That's the gap where most betrayals live. You gave unconditionally while they received with conditions you didn't know existed. They had an exit clause you never saw coming. So what does this mean for you moving forward? Every time you trust someone again, you're making a financial decision dressed up as an emotional one. You're placing a bet on their character with currency you can never get back if they fold. Some people will default entirely. Some will pay interest through loyalty and showing up when it costs them something. Some will vanish, leaving you holding the account book wondering where the math went wrong. The lesson isn't to stop lending trust altogether. That would shrink you into something smaller than you want to be. It's to know exactly what you're lending, to whom, and to recognize the difference between someone who treats trust like a mutual obligation and someone who treats it like a one-time windfall to pocket and move on from. The people worth actually lending to, they're the ones who understand the weight of what's been given. Betrayal rewrites your entire past. You remember the weekend they drove 3 hours to surprise you, the inside jokes that made you both laugh until 2 a.m., the way they showed up when you were broke and broken. Then they betray you, and suddenly you're scrolling through your own memory like it's all suspect. Was that drive really about love, or were they building credit to spend later? Were those jokes bonding, or was I just easy to manipulate? That comfort when I was down, was it genuine care, or the perfect moment to make themselves indispensable? Nothing changed except the betrayal, yet your entire history becomes a crime scene you're now investigating. The mind does this automatically. It doesn't just hurt about what happened now, it weaponizes what happened before. Every good memory gets a shadow. Every tender moment becomes evidence you should have seen the signs. You find yourself rewriting the story in brutal hindsight, turning moments of real connection into Exhibit A in the case against them. And here's what makes this worse. You start doubting your own judgment about people generally. If you are wrong about them, maybe you're wrong about everyone. Maybe you're naive. Maybe you don't actually know how to read people at all. The betrayal doesn't just steal the future, it colonizes the past. It convinces you that you never really knew them, and worse, that you never really knew yourself either. The poison spreads backward through time itself. But there's a small move that actually works. Write down 3 moments that felt real before the betrayal. Then ask yourself if those moments were real because of how they ended, or real because of how you felt in them. The answer is the difference between learning something true about yourself and simply being consumed by the lie they left behind. Convenience masquerades as devotion. Your friend who texts you every day, but only because you live 10 minutes away and the coffee shop is on their route, probably feels like a solid, loyal presence. So does the partner who seems attentive until a real crisis hits, suddenly unavailable, stressed, too much on their plate. The family member who calls regularly always performs the same ritual. They dial you only after they need something first, as if the request is the actual point. You mistook all of this for love, and it wasn't. It's just the path of least resistance wearing a loyalty mask. Real devotion has friction. It means driving across town when you're tired. It means staying quiet when you want to defend yourself. It means showing up when it actively costs you something: time, comfort, energy, reputation, peace. When betrayal comes, you realize how many of your so-called loyalists were just passengers in a convenient relationship. They were never loyal to you. They were loyal to how easy you made things. The moment your usefulness dimmed or the convenient arrangement shifted, they vanished or turned cold. And here is what stings. They probably felt loyal the whole time, because in their mind, loyalty simply meant proximity and a lack of active reason to leave. They never tested themselves, never sacrificed, never actually chose you over comfort. So now, when you meet someone who actively inconveniences themselves for you, who rearranges their schedule, who speaks up when it would be easier to stay silent, who shows up when the route is hard and the timing is terrible. You recognize it immediately. Devotion doesn't feel easy. If it feels frictionless and automatic, you are probably just convenient. That is the difference between being loved and being useful. One stings less until the moment it doesn't. Presence is cheaper than reliability. Someone shows up to your birthday dinner, phone down, laughs at your jokes, asks about the mess, stays until the end. You feel seen. You feel held. 3 weeks later, when you call with actual news, something real, something that needs more than a text back, they're too busy, or they forget, or they do call, but it's distracted, half there, like they're already thinking about leaving. The presence you felt was never a promise. It was just a moment they had left over. Here is what betrayal teaches you. Showing up is the easiest lie we tell ourselves about what we are for someone, because showing up costs nothing but time, and time is the one thing people will spend on you if they have nothing better to do. Reliability, actually doing what you said, remembering what matters, being steady when it's inconvenient, following through when following through bites, that costs something real. It costs you saying no to other people. It costs you staying small when you want to expand. It costs you keeping your word when keeping it hurts. So people scatter their presence like confetti. They text you back fast. They remember your birthday. They seem so solid, so there, until the moment you actually need solid. And then you realize presence was never the same as commitment. Presence is what you do when showing up doesn't demand anything from you. No sacrifice, no friction, no real skin in the game. Loyalty is what you do when it does. The people worth keeping are not the ones who were always around. They are the ones who were there when being there cost them something. Notice that difference. It will save you years of mistaking warmth for devotion. People leave long before they leave. You know that moment when someone tells you they're done? The conversation where they finally say the words, "Yeah, that's not where it started. 3 months earlier, maybe 6, they were already gone. They just didn't have the language for it yet, so they stayed in your life like a ghost in a chair. You watched them eat dinner with you, but not really taste it. You felt them turn their phone face down mid-conversation. Their laugh came late and died fast. The real betrayal isn't the leaving. It's that they left you alone in the relationship long before they packed a bag. And here's what makes it sharp. You probably felt it happening. That cold spot at the table. The way their eyes went somewhere else when you talked about the future. You chalked it up to stress, to work, to a bad week. You gave them the benefit of the doubt because that's what loyal people do. They assume the best until the evidence breaks their fingers. But loyal people also sense the departure before it's announced. You did. You just talked yourself out of trusting that feeling because believing someone was already gone felt like proof that you weren't enough to keep them. So you stayed busy. You made the other person look okay by making yourself smaller. And when they finally left, you weren't shocked. You were relieved because at least the pretending was over. The hard truth, a person can be physically present and spiritually absent for months, and you can sense every second of it without being able to name it. The loyalty trap is staying quiet about what you're sensing because you're afraid of pushing them out the door faster. But the door was already open. You were just the one still trying to lock it. Loyalty has a price ceiling. You know that person you'd swear you'd do anything for, the one you built up in your head as ride or die, no questions asked, till the end loyal. Here's what nobody warns you about. Loyalty doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lives inside a body that gets tired, a bank account that shrinks, a life that demands energy, and a soul that has its own breaking point. You will absolutely show up for them until the moment you can't anymore, and that moment arrives faster than you'd ever believe. Not because you stopped loving them, not because you turned cold, but because every human being, no matter how devoted, has a ceiling where their loyalty meets reality. You cannot sacrifice your rent for their crisis indefinitely. You cannot absorb their betrayals and pretend they didn't happen. You cannot keep offering forgiveness when they are still taking the same actions. The trap is thinking loyalty is infinite, that the people we love most owe us an endless reserve of patience, money, time, emotional labor. Betrayal reveals this most brutally. You find out your ceiling by crashing into it, and then you realize the person who betrayed you might have hit theirs long before you ever noticed. The ones worth keeping around are not the ones who pretend they have no limits. They are the ones who name their ceiling early, respect yours, and build something real inside those honest boundaries. If you're still waiting for someone to prove their loyalty has no bottom, you're waiting for something that doesn't exist and wasting energy that could go toward people who show up in ways that are actually sustainable. That realization, painful as it is, might be the most freeing thing betrayal teaches you. Words always outpace commitment. You sat there while someone swore they'd always be there. They meant it. You felt the weight of it. And then life got messy. A rough season, a hard choice, a moment where staying hurt more than leaving, and suddenly their promise became a shadow. Here's what cuts. Words cost nothing up front. They arrive dressed up in feeling, in good intentions, in the best version of someone's self at that exact moment. But commitment asks you to show up when showing up is friction. When you're tired and bored and resentful and nobody's watching. Most people hit a wall somewhere between the declaration and the delivery, and that gap is where the real betrayal lives. You don't get betrayed by people who stop caring. You get betrayed by people who cared enough to promise, but not enough to bleed for it. Watch them in real time. Someone swears they'll never leave, then pivots the moment things require actual sacrifice. They weren't lying when they said it. They just didn't know themselves yet. Words get written in optimism. Commitment gets written in Tuesday nights and small decisions to stay even when you could go. The cruelest ones aren't the people who say nothing. They're the ones who say everything and then perform a slow exit. Each broken promise, another fracture in what you thought was solid. So here's the move that matters. Measure people by the tiny stuff first. Do they show up for small things without making a show of it? Do they keep promises that don't make them look good to anyone? Do they follow through when nobody will ever know they did? Those are the tells. Anyone can perform love when it's dramatic and witnessed. Only the rare ones love you when it's inconvenient, unglamorous, and entirely invisible. Absence reveals true allegiance. You're in crisis, really in crisis, the kind that reshapes your week or your year. A friend you texted at 2 a.m. doesn't reply until 3 days later, and by then you've already figured it out alone. Another person you barely talk to shows up with coffee and sits without needing to understand the whole thing. That's when the real taxonomy of your relationships becomes visible, not in the good moments, but in the gaps. When you're gone, when you're struggling, when there's nothing in it for them, that's when you see who actually signed up to know you. The people who call back, the ones who remember something you said 6 months ago and circle back to ask how it went, the humans who don't need a reason to stick around. They're revealing something you can't fake. Meanwhile, the ones who only show up when you're throwing a party or posting wins, they're telling you something too. Loyalty isn't built in the spotlight. It's woven into the small, unremarkable check-ins when you're invisible. It's the person who remembers you exist on a Tuesday when nothing is happening. The brutal part lands differently than you'd expect. You probably already knew who these people were. You just didn't want to believe it. We construct elaborate stories about people because they're convenient or familiar or tied to old versions of ourselves. But absence, real absence, strips away the narrative you've been telling. It forces you to see the actual shape of the relationship, not the one you decorated in your head. So when someone goes quiet after they said forever, or when someone shows up in ways that surprise you, don't ignore what's happening. That's your life trying to teach you how to recognize what's real, and more importantly, how to stop wasting weight on the ones who won't carry it. Shared history guarantees nothing. You have 15 years of memories with someone, inside jokes that nobody else will ever understand, photos from trips that shaped who you became, fights you survived together, celebrations only the two of you showed up for. And then one day they walk, or worse, they stay but turn cold, and suddenly all that history feels like it was written in water. This is the cruelest part of betrayal, the realization that shared history is not a contract. It is not collateral. It does not buy you loyalty, forgiveness, or even basic kindness when things get hard. People can treasure a memory and still leave. They can laugh at an old story and then act like you never mattered. Time spent together does not create debt. Proximity does not create obligation. The years do not automatically tie someone to you, not unless they choose every single day to keep choosing. And here is what makes it worse. The person who betrays you often uses the history against you. They say things like, after everything we've been through, as if the shared past somehow makes their exit more justified, more reasonable, more something. They weaponize the memory. They act like you should have known better, should have seen it coming, should have appreciated them more while they were still deciding whether to leave. What you learn is that history is just a collection of moments that happened. It is not a guarantee of a future moment. It is not a spell you cast that binds someone to you forever. The only thing that keeps someone close is their active choice to stay, to show up, to care, right now, in this moment, not borrowed from yesterday. That choice has to be renewed every single time. It cannot live on old currency, and it cannot feed on yesterday's promises. Loyalty quietly follows self-interest. You know that friend who showed up every week when you were useful to them, the one whose texts dried up the moment you couldn't help anymore? That wasn't betrayal in the loud sense. That was just the gravitational pull of self-interest, and loyalty was never fighting against it. Here's what stings. Most people aren't even conscious they're doing it. They genuinely feel like loyal friends. The brain is wired to make self-serving choices and then dress them up as moral ones. So your friend's absence after your divorce wasn't calculated coldness. It was just easier to maintain friendships with people who still had something to offer. You see this everywhere once you start looking. The colleague who mentors you brilliantly until you stop being a reflection of their success. The family member who remembers your birthday when you're still worth impressing. The romantic partner who stays until the emotional labor outweighs the comfort. The boss who champions you during growth years and ghosts you during struggle. The neighbor who calls when they need something borrowed. None of this means people are cartoonish villains. It means loyalty in its purest form is not a guarantee. It's a choice that only survives when self-interest and closeness align. When they don't, when staying loyal costs too much, or when leaving serves the person better. The loyalty evaporates like morning fog. The unbearable truth isn't that people are selfish, it's that you can't build anything real by pretending they're not. So stop measuring loyalty by permanence alone. Start measuring it by the moments when someone chose you over easier, chose you when it actually cost them something, chose you when no one was watching. Those moments, rare as they are, become the only metric worth trusting. The betrayer always feels justified. Ask someone who broke your trust to explain themselves, and you'll rarely hear, "I was selfish," or "I didn't care enough." Instead, you get a story. They were overwhelmed. You weren't listening. They had no other choice. The system forced them. You changed first. What matters is this: in their own mind, they were the reasonable one, and you were the one who made betrayal necessary. This isn't usually a lie they're telling you. It's a lie they've already told themselves so completely that it's become their truth. The human brain is spectacularly good at this. It reshuffles facts, buries inconvenient moments, and elevates the smallest justification into a full moral framework. They remember the time you disappointed them and forget the 100 times they chose you anyway. They amplify the one argument where you were unfair and erase the context of their own patterns. By the time they betray you, they've already rewritten history so thoroughly that loyalty itself looks optional, even naive. This is why confronting them rarely lands. You're holding the facts. They're holding a narrative they've spent months or years polishing, and from inside that narrative, they're not the villain. They're the one who finally stood up for themselves. The cruelest part isn't the betrayal itself, it's that they'll likely never fully see what they did because the mind is far more committed to self-protection than to truth. The brain will defend a false story with more energy than it ever defended you. So stop waiting for the apology that includes real ownership. It may never come. What matters now is whether you can leave without needing them to admit it, and whether you can forgive yourself for the parts you couldn't control. You mourn a person who never existed. Here's what catches most people off guard. The grief after betrayal often isn't really about what they did. It's about the person you thought they were, the version you built in your head over months or years. That person was real to you. The gestures meant something. The words felt true. And when the mask slips, you're not just angry at who they actually are. You're standing over the grave of someone who never drew a single breath outside your own mind. Think about how you explain them to friends. They would never. They're the kind of person who, those sentences were prophecy. You took scattered evidence, a kindness here, a shared laugh there, and you architected an entire person around it. They didn't have to play along. Your brain did most of the heavy lifting, and the cruelest part is that they benefited from your generosity of interpretation while they were busy being someone entirely different. So when you cry, you're not just losing them, you're losing the future you'd already written, the version of yourself that would be safe with them, the story where you were special enough, valuable enough, worth the version of themselves they promised to be. That grief is real even though the person never existed, and that's why it doesn't heal the way betrayal by a stranger would. You're mourning something only you ever knew. The hard move forward isn't accepting who they really are, it's forgiving yourself for being generous enough to imagine better. The imagination wasn't a flaw, but using it to paper over red flags, to rewrite their words into kindness, to believe in a future that required them to be someone new. That's the trap worth learning to spot early next time. Warning signs get retroactively obvious. Replay a conversation in your head after betrayal, and it rewrites itself. Not just one conversation, months of them, all at once, and they all look sinister now. The time they said they'd call and didn't. The laugh that seemed a little too easy when you mentioned something you cared about. the way they never asked follow-up questions, just waited for their turn to talk. None of these moments felt like warnings when they happened. They felt normal, maybe even forgivable. But now, armed with hindsight and hurt, your brain has reassigned them all meaning. Here's where it gets cruel. You start to believe you should have seen it coming. You tell yourself you missed obvious red flags, that you were naive or stupid or deserving of what happened. The trick is that these obvious signs only became obvious after the betrayal confirmed them. Before that, they were just texture in a relationship, the ordinary friction that exists everywhere. Your brain is running a search and rescue operation on your own past, looking for evidence that you failed to protect yourself, and it will find it because memory is plastic and pain is a powerful filter. What you're actually experiencing is the cruelest form of hindsight, your mind weaponizing clarity it never had before. That retroactive obviousness feels like control, like proof you could have prevented it if you'd been sharper. But it's mostly an illusion. The hard move, the one that takes real discipline, is separating what you genuinely ignored from what simply wasn't knowable until the full picture arrived. Not everything that looks like a warning in hindsight was a warning when it happened. Some of it was just life, and you were just there, living it normally. The real sign of healing isn't spotting invisible threats in the past. It's stopping the punishment of your former self for not being prophetic. Comfort gets mistaken for closeness. You can spend 5 years on a couch with someone, finishing their sentences, knowing exactly how they take their coffee, laughing at their specific brand of weird humor, and still be a stranger the moment things get hard. That's the quiet lie comfort tells you. It feels like intimacy when really it's just habit wearing a friendship costume. Real closeness asks something of you. It demands that you show up when showing up costs something, that you tell the truth when the lie would feel better, that you stay curious about someone even when you already think you know them completely. Comfort, though, comfort lets you stop trying. You can sink into those easy rhythms, those predictable patterns, those safe conversations that never actually risk anything, and mistake that ease for depth. Then someone gets offered a better job in another city, or they meet someone new, or circumstances shift even slightly, and suddenly that person who felt so close disappears. Because they were never actually tethered to you, they were just comfortable around you. And comfort is the first thing people abandon when it stops being convenient. The ones who stay through the actual hard parts are the ones who chose closeness over comfort from the start, who asked harder questions, who pushed back when it mattered, who made the relationship cost them something so that it actually meant something. After betrayal, you start to see the difference. You replay years of cozy evenings and realize how little you actually told each other about what scared you or what you wanted, what you needed, what you feared losing. You were comfortable. You were never close, and that ease dissolves the moment the weather changes, leaving you wondering if anyone was ever really there at all. Reciprocity is rarely equal. You show up at 2 a.m. when they call. They don't answer your texts for 3 days. You remember every story they tell. They forget yours midweek. You lend money without asking when. They make you wait through a conversation about why you need it. This isn't always malice. Sometimes it's just that people are wired differently, or they're drowning in their own stuff and can't see you drowning in yours. But here's what stings. You keep thinking the imbalance is temporary, that if you give enough, the scales will tip back. They rarely do. What makes this brutally real is that you probably aren't even keeping score consciously. You're just noticing over months or years that your loyalty moves in one direction while theirs is conditional, sporadic, or conveniently available only when they need something. The trap is believing that pointing it out will fix it, that saying, "Hey, I show up for you, why can't you show up for me?" will suddenly make them understand. It won't, because they likely experience the relationship completely differently. In their mind, they're doing fine. They're just not built the way you are. And that's the brutal part. Some people are inherently asymmetrical. They take more than they give, not out of deliberate cruelty, but because that's their baseline for how relationships work. The real move after betrayal is learning to stop waiting for the scales to balance. Stop performing loyalty as a down payment on future reciprocity. Instead, ask yourself the question that changes everything. What am I actually getting from this right now as it breathes, not as I've been training myself to imagine it? That clarity alone forces you to see the relationship as it truly is, not as a promise waiting to be kept. Loyalty fades without maintenance. You know that friend you could text at 2 in the morning, the one who'd drop everything? Maybe you still could, but you haven't texted in months. The loyalty hasn't evaporated. You'd both show up if something terrible happened. But the channels have gone quiet, and quiet has a way of bending into distance. It's not dramatic betrayal. It's what happens when two people stop doing the small work of staying close. Nobody warns you that most betrayal doesn't come from malice or a sudden switch flipping. It comes from neglect. You assume loyalty is fixed, a vault you both opened once, and it stays open forever. But loyalty is actually like a plant. Skip watering for weeks, then months, and it doesn't die tomorrow. It gets thin. You miss check-ins, skip plans, and somewhere along the way, the person stops believing you actually care. They didn't betray you. You both just stopped showing up. The brutal part is this: fade is almost invisible until it's too late. Nothing snapped. It bent slowly under your absence. When you finally reach out again, expecting warmth, you feel coldness instead. The person on the other end already made peace with you being gone. They let go because you taught them to. If you want loyalty to last, it needs small, regular proof you meant it. Not grand gestures, just presence. A text saying you were thinking of them, following up on something they mentioned weeks ago, showing up when you said you would, remembering the details they trusted you with and bringing them back up months later. These aren't big things, but they're the difference between a bond that lives and one that slowly starves. The loyalty was never the problem. The maintenance was. Public allies vanish in private. You know the person who laughed loudest at your jokes in the group chat, who liked every photo, who seemed to have your back when others were around. Then something went sideways. You needed something real, something that cost them time or reputation or comfort, and suddenly they were unavailable. Not mean about it, just gone. The thing about public loyalty is that it costs almost nothing. A comment, a retweet, a nod across the room. It feels like devotion because it's visible, because other people can see it, because it makes them feel good in front of an audience. But the moment loyalty requires privacy, a hard conversation with someone they're afraid of, a choice that helps you but inconveniences them, showing up when nobody's watching, those public allies have an uncanny way of developing scheduling conflicts. They'll text you later. They'll sort it out tomorrow. They'll call you back. What you learn, sometimes painfully, is that public performances of loyalty are often just that, performances. The person posting about chosen family while ignoring your crisis isn't lying exactly, they're just operating in a different currency. They're trading visibility for the feeling of being good, not trading time or risk for your actual survival. This isn't about demonizing everyone who shows up on social media. It's about learning to recognize the difference between someone who performs loyalty and someone who practices it when it's boring, difficult, and nobody else is keeping score. Betrayal teaches you to listen for the people who disappear from the comments but show up at your door, who text in the middle of the night without an audience, who stick around when the applause has stopped. That distinction changes everything you thought you knew about who was ever really there. Crisis filters your entire circle. A real crisis doesn't announce itself with a warning label. One day, you're navigating the ordinary hum of friendships and family bonds, and the next day, you're in actual need. Maybe you've lost money, health, a job, your footing. And what happens then is almost theatrical in how fast the sorting happens. The people who suddenly go quiet, the ones who disappear into their own schedules, the ones who send a text but never show up. They're not bad people necessarily. They're just showing you that the friendship was built on convenience, not on anything deeper. Meanwhile, someone you hadn't heard from in months calls. Someone you barely ranked in your circle moves into the center. Someone you thought was foundational gets revealed as tissue thin. This isn't betrayal in the movie sense. It's something quieter and more instructive. Crisis works like a solvent. It dissolves the false bonds first, leaves the real ones standing. The trick is that you can't predict which is which until the crisis arrives. You can guess, you can hope, but you won't know for certain. And once the dust settles, once you've watched people scatter or step closer, that knowledge sits with you permanently. You'll never fully unknow who showed up and who didn't. You'll never fully trust your old map of your circle again. Some people call this painful. They're right. But it's also useful because it teaches you the difference between the people you thought you had and the people who actually have you. That second group, however small, becomes the only circle worth building from. Everything else was just decoration, and decoration is the first thing you stop caring about when the ground shifts under your feet. Gratitude expires faster than favors. You do something costly for someone, rearrange your whole week, lose sleep, spend money you didn't plan to spend. For about 3 days, they thank you. Maybe a week if you're lucky, then something shifts. The favor becomes ordinary, absorbed into how they expect you to show up. A month later, if you cannot repeat it at the same level, suddenly you are the one who stopped trying. This is the asymmetry nobody warns you about. Gratitude has a half-life, but obligation lives forever. A favor you gave in crisis becomes a baseline. You raise the bar for what love looks like, and now anything less reads as withdrawal. Here is where it gets quiet and cruel. They will resent you for the version of yourself you showed in that moment, because now you're expected to live there permanently. You cannot go back to normal without seeming cold, so the debt never settles. You keep paying interest on something they stopped counting. The person you helped does not forget the help itself. They forget the sacrifice. To them, it was a moment. To you, it was a choice. The people worth keeping around are the ones who feel the weight of what you gave, not just the thing itself. They remember the cost, not just the outcome. They know the difference between a good day and a good person, and they do not punish you for being human on the other days. Watch for people who thank you and then immediately forget you sacrificed, who treat your emergency version as your baseline. That forgetting is the first small sign of someone who will eventually resent the very person they once needed most. Their loyalty to you competes with self. You probably think loyalty is a choice they make in the moment, that when things get hard, they either stay or they leave. But that is not quite how it works. What actually happens is quieter and more brutal. Every person you know is running a constant calculation between what keeps you close and what keeps them safe, intact, whole. When those two things conflict, self always wins, not because they are selfish in some cartoon way, but because survival instinct is older than any promise you made each other. A friend might love you genuinely and still distance themselves the second supporting you costs their reputation or their peace. A partner might care for you completely and still choose a job, an addiction, a fresh start in another city, not because the loyalty was fake, but because their loyalty to themselves came first. This is not betrayal in the way you learned it. It is just math. You are one weight on their scale, and sometimes other weights are heavier. The trap is thinking that if they really loved you, this math would come out differently. But that is not how humans are built. We are wired to protect ourselves first, then expand outward if we have energy left. The person who disappoints you is not breaking a law. They are following one written into your nervous system too. And here is the part that actually matters. The brutal truth is that nobody's loyalty to you will ever outweigh their loyalty to survival. The quieter realization, the one that actually helps, is that you would do exactly the same thing if the stakes were yours. They are not unusual. They are just human, and so are you. The loyal are the most exploited. You text first. You remember birthdays. You cancel your own plans when someone's in crisis. You don't keep a ledger. You just care. And that absence of scorekeeping makes you invisible to the people who are always counting. A manipulator spots you instantly. They see someone who won't leave, who'll absorb disappointment without making a scene, who will rewrite betrayal as misunderstanding just to keep the relationship alive. So they test you. Smaller lies first, then bigger ones. They borrow money they don't intend to repay. They confide secrets to you, but never ask about yours. They show up when they need something and vanish when you need them. The loyal person interprets this as failure. Maybe I'm not being patient enough. Maybe I'm asking for too much. So you shrink yourself further, give more, excuse more until you're running on fumes and they're still treating you like a vending machine with unlimited stock. The hard truth is that loyalty without reciprocity isn't love. It's a business model that profits one person at your expense. Exploiters know exactly how to keep you on the hook. Occasional warmth, just enough to make you think you imagined the cold parts. A smile at the right moment. A confession that pulls you back in. By the time you realize what's happened, you've poured years into someone who was never going to fill the bucket. The real reckoning comes not when you stop being loyal, but when you ask yourself whether you're loyal to people who would be loyal to you, and whether you can recognize the difference between devotion and depletion before it costs you everything. The ones who stay are not the strongest. They're often the ones who learned early that their worth lived in other people's approval, and no amount of distance or silence will ever fully convince them otherwise. Betrayal is a slow decision. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, "Today, I will betray someone I care about." It does not work that way. What actually happens is smaller, quieter, and happens in the gaps where you stop paying attention. A promise gets soft in the retelling, a boundary gets tested, then crossed again because nothing happened the first time. A conversation gets skipped because it felt easier than having it. A loyalty gets swapped for convenience so gradually that by the time the real moment comes, the one where you have to choose between them and yourself, you are not choosing at all. You are just finishing a sentence that started months ago in the dark. The person on the other side looks shocked, but you have known for a while. They are just now seeing what you became when they were not looking. And that is the brutal part. Betrayal almost never feels like betrayal to the person doing it. It feels like self-preservation. It feels like exhaustion. It feels like the thing you had to do because nobody else was going to. By the time the knife comes out, your hand has already held it 100 times in your head. So when someone says they did not mean to hurt you, they are not entirely lying. They just mean they did not intend to hurt you in that moment. They just did not intend to stop hurting you either. The decision was not made in a flash. It was made in every small silence, every rationalization, every time you chose yourself and told yourself it was not about them. That is why the people closest to you are the ones who betray the hardest. They had the most time to decide, and they spent all of it talking themselves into it. Excuses always precede the exit. That friend who started getting busy right before they ghosted you, the one who suddenly had reasons, work stress, and family stuff, and needing space to figure themselves out, they seemed almost apologetic about it, like they were warning you, like the excuses themselves were a kind of courtesy. Here's what you learned after. Those excuses weren't explanations. They were rehearsals. People almost never leave without a script, and the script doesn't write itself. They need to build a case against the relationship, a small ledger of reasons why staying became impossible, and it happens so gradually that you don't see it as the setup it is. A complaint here, a boundary there, a story about how tired they are. Each excuse is a brick in the wall between you and them, and by the time they're ready to go, they've already built the whole thing in plain sight. The cruelest part is that some of them might even believe their own excuses because they've told themselves the story so many times that they've confused the narrative with the truth. But you'll recognize the pattern now. Watch for the shift from talking about the problem to talking around it, from connecting to explaining, from actually solving something to needing their reasons to be witnessed and believed. That's the moment the goodbye has already happened in their head. They're just waiting for you to catch up. The exit wasn't sudden. It was announced 100 times in small, careful doses, and the excuses were never apologies. They were permission slips they were writing for themselves, each one a small step further away from the person standing right in front of them. Loyalty and fear look identical. You know the person who never leaves, never questions, never rocks the boat. They show up on time. They listen to your problems. They take your side in arguments even when you're wrong. For years you call it loyalty, and maybe they even call it that too. Then, one day you realize they've been terrified the whole time, terrified of abandonment, terrified of losing you, terrified that if they ever disagree with you or set a boundary, you'd disappear. That's not loyalty. That's a hostage holding themselves captive. Fear-based attachment is invisible until something breaks, and a loyal person can walk away and still love you. A scared person cannot. Walking away feels like annihilation, so they stay frozen in whatever shape you need them to be. They say yes when they mean no. They swallow resentment. They perform devotion as damage control. And because fear makes people incredibly reliable, because desperation looks exactly like dedication, you never see the cage they're building around themselves. After betrayal, you start seeing this everywhere. The friend who agreed with everything you said wasn't honoring you. They were protecting themselves. The partner who gave up their own plans wasn't choosing you. They were choosing not to be left. If you've been the scared person in a relationship, you might not even know what real loyalty feels like. You've been confusing white-knuckled attachment with love, and that confusion will follow you into every relationship after. The question that haunts you isn't, were they loyal? It's, were they ever actually free to choose me? Because real loyalty requires a choice, and choice requires freedom. Everything else is just fear wearing loyalty's costume, and the cruelest part is how well it fits. People protect their own narrative. You tell someone what they did to you. You lay out the timeline, the words, the weight of it, and somewhere in the middle of your story, you watch their face do something strange, not defensive exactly, but distant, like they are listening to you describe a movie they never saw. Here is what is happening. They are not hearing your truth. They are hearing a threat to the story they have already written about themselves. In that story, they are not the person who hurt you. They might be the person who was hurt instead, or misunderstood, or caught in impossible circumstances. Your version of events does not fit the architecture they built. So instead of expanding their story to make room for you, they shrink you out of it entirely. This is not about forgetting or denying. It is about survival, the kind that happens in the brain before the heart even knows it is scared. People will choose their own narrative over your pain almost every time because their narrative is the only thing holding their sense of self together, the only wall between them and the person they fear they might actually be. You can show them evidence, witnesses, your own scars. None of it matters if it contradicts the story they need to be true. The brutal part is that they are not lying to you. They genuinely believe their version. Their memory has already rewritten itself, the details softening and shifting until the thread is gone. Real loyalty means someone is willing to question their own narrative to make room for yours. Most people will never do that. Forgiveness never restores trust. You can forgive someone and still flinch when they walk into a room. That flinch is not weakness or incomplete healing. It is your nervous system remembering what it learned. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, a release of the weight they no longer deserve to carry. Trust is something entirely different, a prediction about the future, built on evidence of past behavior, and no apology rewrites that data. After betrayal, people often collapse these two together because they want to believe that saying, "I forgive you," snaps the relationship back to what it was. It cannot. You might genuinely let go of anger towards someone that is real and matters, but forgiveness does not erase the knowledge of what they chose to do when they thought nobody was watching. Trust has to be rebuilt incrementally through consistent, different behavior over time, and even then, it will never feel the same. It will feel earned, guarded, conditional, and that is not cynicism. That is wisdom. The person who betrayed you taught you something concrete about their character. Forgiveness means you are not going to let that lesson poison your ability to love other people, but it does not mean you will forget the lesson. If they truly understand what they did, they will not ask you to. They will accept that your caution is the price they pay, and they will rebuild slowly without demanding credit or timeline. If they pressure you to trust faster, to prove forgiveness by forgetting, that itself is a second betrayal, a refusal to take responsibility for what their actions actually cost. The scar tissue is real. It is not supposed to feel like unmarked skin. Your wariness is not punishment. It is paying attention. And someone who loves you will understand that difference without needing you to explain it. Distance exposes indifference. You move away, maybe across town, maybe across the country, and you wait to see who reaches across the gap. The ones who do, They call or text or show up with no occasion. The ones who don't, you'll notice their silence first as a small sting, then as a pattern, then as the truth you needed to see but didn't want. Because proximity hides a lot. When someone lives in your daily orbit, it's easy to mistake routine for devotion. You see them because your paths cross naturally, and that regularity can feel like care, but remove the geography, remove the accident of collision, and what remains? Real loyalty doesn't need a calendar reminder or a convenient coffee shop halfway between you. It reaches, it initiates, it remembers without being reminded. The hardest part isn't the distance itself, it's realizing that some people were never as close as you thought. They were just there, and there is not the same as there for you. What you discover in the quiet weeks after you leave is that indifference doesn't announce itself with cruelty. It whispers through negligence. No dramatic fight, no sudden coldness, just the slow erosion of effort until one day you realize they never actually fought to keep you. They simply let you go. And that casualness, that ease with which they released you, tells you everything about how much weight you carried in their world. The people worth keeping are the ones who make the distance irrelevant, who treat absence like a small problem with a simple solution. They close the gap anyway. They do this not because geography demands it, but because you do. The betrayal isn't in the distance. It's in the discovery that someone you thought was walking beside you was only ever standing in your path. Loyalty is situational, not fixed. Watch someone you know who is rock solid at work, the person you trust with a crisis at 3 a.m, and then see how they move when money gets tight or when standing by you costs them something real. That person hasn't changed. The situation has. What you're seeing isn't hypocrisy. It's the shape loyalty actually takes in the world, and it looks nothing like the fairy tale where someone loves you the same way forever, no matter what. Betrayal teaches you what nothing else can. Loyalty has a breaking point because it always does. It's not about character flaws. It's about the weight people can actually carry. Someone loyal when you're winning, when being near you brings status or comfort or return, is still being loyal within their capacity. The same person falters when the cost changes. Maybe they're scared. Maybe their own survival is on the line. Maybe they simply run out of what they had to give. You can hate them for it. You can feel the sting. But if you want to move forward without building the next betrayal into your expectations, you have to sit with this hard truth. Loyalty is never unconditional because the human beings holding it are always conditional. They have limits. They have other people depending on them. They have fear and competing needs and their own fragility. So the move after betrayal isn't to search for someone whose loyalty is pure or permanent. That person doesn't exist. It's to get ruthlessly clear about which situations, which stakes, which conditions bring out someone's steadiness. Choose people you can trust, not in the abstract, but in the specific, messy reality where you both actually live. That clarity is what saves you from the next one. The wounded become suspicious. After betrayal, your threat detection system gets recalibrated by fire. Your brain just learned that someone you trusted could lie to your face and mean it, and now every late text, every vague answer, every slight shift in tone gets fed into that new algorithm and comes back flagged red. Your partner stays late at work and you are checking their location. A friend goes quiet for a few days and you are replaying old conversations for hidden resentment, listening for the sting you missed before. You are not paranoid. You are running on updated data. The problem is that updated data is not the same as clear data. Betrayal scrambles your ability to separate signal from noise. You cannot tell the difference between a real warning sign and the ghost of what already broke you, so you treat every friendship like it is on probation, every promise like it comes with an expiration date you cannot see. This is the sneaking cost nobody warns you about, not the immediate wound, but the chronic hypervigilance that follows it. The way your nervous system stays coiled long after the person who hurt you is gone. And here is where it gets cruel. This suspicion often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People feel the weight of being auditioned instead of befriended. They sense they are always one mistake away from exile, so they pull back, create distance, stop trying quite so hard. When they do, your wounded brain whispers, "See, I was right." The trick is learning to distinguish between protection and poison, holding real boundaries without letting one betrayal become the rule that nobody gets trusted again. Overgiving invites being discarded. Watch what happens when you start showing up at midnight, when you bend without being asked, when you absorb the mess they leave behind. At first, it feels like love. You think if I give enough, I'll become irreplaceable. But generosity doesn't work that way. The more you offer, the faster it becomes invisible. A text at midnight stops meaning something and becomes a subscription service they expect. The help you once offered with pride becomes the help they demand when you're tired. Your willingness to sacrifice doesn't prove you're treasured. It proves to them that you'll always absorb it. You've rewritten their expectations downward, and now you're chasing a target that moves every time you reach it. Here's what betrayal finally teaches you. The people who discarded you didn't do it because you gave too little. They did it because your generosity made it safe to neglect you. You became the cushion that caught them every time they fell short. So they stopped trying. They stopped noticing. They stopped valuing. You were so busy softening the consequences of their carelessness that you made it comfortable for them to forget what you bring. And when you finally pause, when exhaustion forces a boundary, they don't see fatigue. They see betrayal. They feel wronged because you've trained them to expect everything, and now you're taking it away. The fix isn't more giving. It's learning to let them feel what your absence actually costs. Stop being the cushion. Stop making it safe to neglect you. The people worth keeping will notice the moment you slip away. Everyone else will only notice when you're already gone. Some bonds survive only in memory. You keep their birthday in your phone. You see their name and feel that small catch in your chest. The person who knew you at 17, who laughed at your worst jokes, who promised forever in a way that felt like fact instead of hope. But when you reach out now, the gap has become so wide that a text feels absurd. Years have passed. They're living a life you're not part of, and you're living one they don't know. So the bond doesn't shatter or end in some dramatic way. It just becomes a ghost you visit. You remember the intensity, the ease, the feeling of being truly seen. And then you close your phone because acknowledging the distance feels worse than pretending they're still there. The cruelest truth here is that sometimes the people closest to us don't betray us with a lie or an act. They betray us by slowly becoming strangers. The friendship dies not from violence, but from evaporation. What made it real was presence, consistency, the small rituals that proved you mattered. Remove those things, and you're left with history and nostalgia masquerading as connection. You might still care deeply. You might still think of them warmly. But loyalty requires more than memory. It requires showing up. And when you stop, the bond doesn't transform into something pure and eternal. It becomes a story you tell yourself about what you once had. The hard part is accepting that some bonds were real and mattered and still couldn't survive the shape their life took. Not every ending is a betrayal. Sometimes it's just the cost of time moving forward while you stay stuck in the warmth of what was, and that ache that quiet, dull ache when you see their name, that's the price of having loved someone you no longer know. Loyalty demands inconvenient proof. You know the moment. Someone you love asks you to show up in a way that actually costs you something. Not their time, not their attention, but yours. Maybe it's sitting with them through a crisis when you have your own mess brewing. Maybe it's telling them a hard truth when silence would be easier, cheaper, safer. Maybe it's being the person who remembers what they said 3 months ago when they were spiraling and holding them accountable to their own values instead of just nodding along. These moments feel like tests, and that is exactly what they are. Loyalty that never costs you anything is just vibes. The friend who loves you only when you are winning, the partner who stays only when things are convenient, the family member who shows up for the party but vanishes when the bills pile up. Easy loyalty proves nothing. The people who actually matter do not need you to feel warm about them. They need you to act like they matter when it would be simpler not to. When your energy is low, when you have nothing left in the tank, when keeping your mouth shut would protect your reputation, when involvement might actually hurt you. That is when loyalty stops being performance and becomes something real. And here is what betrayal teaches you. You can spot the real ones retroactively by asking which people stayed inconvenient, which ones did not ghost you when things got hard, which ones never asked you to choose yourself over them, but also did not vanish the moment you actually did. Loyalty is not about perfection or never needing space. It is about showing up when showing up costs something genuine, something you cannot easily replace or recover. Flattery is loyalty's counterfeit. Someone who tells you exactly what you want to hear, exactly when you need it most. That person feels loyal. They agree with your story. They validate your wounds. They make you feel seen, and you mistake that warmth for actual care. But flattery is a mirror, not a map. It reflects you back to yourself rather than pulling you toward anything true or hard. Real loyalty sometimes sounds like disagreement. It sounds like someone saying no when you're begging for yes, asking if you've thought about the other side, staying quiet when silence costs them nothing, but honesty costs everything. The flatterer wants you to feel good about yourself in this moment. The loyal person wants you to become someone worth being loyal to in the next one. After betrayal, you often realize the people who spoke hardest truths, who didn't always make you feel better, were the ones who actually stuck around. They weren't performing loyalty, they were living it, which is quieter and less intoxicating. The person who said the nice thing at the party moved on when things got real. The person who said nothing, who just showed up when you fell, that's the one you needed. Flattery compounds over time too. It trains you to hear lies as love. You start hunting for people who make you feel good instead of people who make you better. And then, when betrayal hits, you wonder why someone who said all the right words left you so empty. They were never feeding you. They were just reflecting your hunger back to you. Start noticing the difference. When someone's words make you feel temporarily amazing versus when their presence makes you feel actually safe. One is flattery. One is loyalty. The distance between them is everything, and it determines whether they'll stay when the mirror breaks. The first betrayal predicts more. There's a moment after the first real betrayal where you're standing in your own kitchen, replaying it, and something shifts beneath your skin. Not sadness yet. That comes later. Right now, it's a kind of numbness mixed with a terrible clarity. You realize you didn't see it coming because you weren't looking for it. Someone you trusted simply chose themselves when the moment mattered. And here's what nobody tells you. That first betrayal doesn't close the door on trust. It opens a different one. You begin to notice patterns you missed before. The friend who cancels last minute but expects you to rearrange your life. The partner who shares your secrets with their coworkers but swears they won't do it again. The family member who only calls when they need something. These aren't new behaviors. They were always there, but your radar is recalibrated now, and suddenly you see them with a clarity that feels almost violent. The brutal truth is that the first betrayal teaches your nervous system a lesson that spreads. You start scanning for the next one, sometimes fairly, sometimes in ways that poison relationships that didn't deserve it. People sense that shift. They feel the way you're holding back now, testing them, waiting for the moment when they show their true face. Some will earn your trust again slowly, carefully, with consistent small choices over years. Many won't, not because they're bad, but because you've already filed them under threat, and the mind doesn't like reversing those files. The real sting is this: that first betrayal didn't just hurt you once. It taught you to expect hurt, and expectations have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. You'll find yourself in a different kind of loneliness, surrounded by people you no longer fully believe in. You trained them how to leave. The person who left you wasn't born knowing how to do it. Every time you forgave too fast, you showed them the escape hatch didn't actually lock. Every time you begged them to stay, instead of asking yourself whether you wanted to, you handed them the script for the breakup conversation, the one where tears and apologies work better than honesty. You rewarded the small betrayals with understanding, the half-truths with benefit of the doubt, the times they pulled away with more effort from you. You made staying low cost and leaving painless. The thing that hurts most after betrayal isn't just that they left, it's recognizing your own hands built the door they walked through. You taught them that abandoning you carried no real consequence, only your sadness, which they learned to sit with. You showed them through 1,000 small surrenders that your worth didn't depend on whether they chose you. So when the real moment came, when they met someone else, when they got tired, when they decided they wanted more, they already knew exactly how to do it. They'd practiced the feeling 100 times in your patience. They'd tested whether you'd stay every time you stayed, despite not wanting to. And the cruelest part, you probably did all of this trying to be the exception, the person who loved so well they'd never want to leave. But unconditional acceptance isn't love, it's permission. When you make it easy for someone to hurt you, when you absorb their indifference like it's your job to fix it, you're not being noble. You're writing their exit strategy in real time. The people we train to leave are usually the ones we trained most carefully. Next time you're tempted to bend that far, remember, loyalty to yourself has to come first, or you're just handing them the map. Loyalty can become a cage. You know that friend who stays in a friendship out of guilt, or the partner who swallows their needs because leaving feels like a betrayal of the vow? That is loyalty turning inward, becoming less about love and more about self-imprisonment. After someone hurts you, you might promise yourself you will never abandon them, as if suffering alongside them proves your devotion. The cage looks like virtue from the inside. You tell yourself you are being loyal, patient, understanding, but loyalty without boundaries is not love. It is a slow self-erasure. You begin to deny your own pain to protect theirs. You shrink your world to fit their chaos. You stay in conversations that drain you because leaving early feels selfish. You apologize for needing space. And the cruelest part, people sense when loyalty has become obligation and they do not respect it. They depend on it. They know you will not leave, so the incentive to change evaporates. You're no longer a partner, you are infrastructure. Real loyalty, the kind that actually means something after betrayal, includes the courage to say no. It means you can love someone and walk away. It means you do not set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm and call it devotion. The cage only holds you if you believe staying proves something about your character. It does not. What proves your character is knowing when to unlock the door and doing it even when it hurts both of you. The people worth staying for are the ones who give you permission to leave. Nostalgia distorts every betrayal. 6 months after someone hurts you, you'll find yourself scrolling through old photos and thinking, that person was different then. The memory glows. The version of them you held before the betrayal starts to feel like the real one, and the person who actually hurt you feels like a villain wearing their face. This is what nostalgia does in the aftermath. It rewrites the whole story backward, softening the early red flags, burnishing the small kindnesses into proof of who they really were. Your brain does this because the gap between the person you believed in and the person who betrayed you is too wide to live in, so it narrows it. It finds reasons to doubt your own judgment less harshly. Maybe they weren't so bad. Maybe you misread the signs. Maybe the good parts were real and the hurt was just a lapse, a moment of weakness in an otherwise decent person. But here's what matters. Nostalgia doesn't make the betrayal less real. It just makes you less angry at the person who caused it. And that can trap you in a dangerous loop. You soften, you rationalize, you find yourself almost defending them to friends who saw what happened clearly and are still waiting for you to do the same. Weeks later, you're vulnerable again, half convinced the old version of them is still in there somewhere, buried under circumstance or stress or some wound you didn't know about. The cruelest part? Nostalgia makes you doubt your own survival instinct. You question whether you were right to leave, right to protect yourself, right to grieve what you lost. The warmth of the memory clouds the clarity of what actually happened. When nostalgia creeps in, it's not forgiveness, it's amnesia with a filter. And that's exactly when old betrayers find their way back in, because you've already convinced yourself they weren't so bad after all. Boundaries reveal fair weather ties. You set a limit. Maybe it's small, like asking a friend not to show up unannounced, or something bigger, like refusing to loan money anymore, and suddenly the room sorts itself. The people who actually love you might push back or feel the sting, but they respect the line because they respect you. The fair weather ones vanish before you finish the sentence, or they stay but shift. Colder, less available, treating you like you've committed some unspoken crime by protecting yourself. Before betrayal, you might have mistaken people's flexibility for closeness. You thought bending meant they cared. Now you know the sharper truth. People who love you want you healthy, even if healthy means they see less of you. People who needed you, your availability, your money, your emotional labor, your willingness to absorb their problems, they were renting access, not building a relationship. A boundary doesn't announce itself as a test, but it works like one anyway, filtering automatically. The ones who get angry at your boundary aren't really angry at the boundary itself. They're angry that you've stopped being useful in the specific way they designed. And the ones who stick around, who actually ask why the boundary matters to you instead of just resenting it, those are the ones who were never temporary. They were just waiting for permission to show you what real loyalty actually looks like. Not in the easy times when you were asking for nothing, but now when you finally know your own worth. The boundary is the knife that cuts clean, and what stays on your side after the cut is what was always yours. Everyone is loyal to comfort. You know that person who stayed in a dead relationship for 7 years, then left the moment something felt inconvenient. Or the friend who ghosted you right when you needed them most, not because you'd wronged them, but because being around your sadness felt heavy. They weren't disloyal in the way you thought. They were just loyal to something else, the absence of friction. Here is what nobody tells you until it hits you in the chest. Almost everyone will abandon a relationship if staying in it costs them more comfort than leaving it, not malice, not lack of love, simple math. You show up with real problems, and suddenly you're the demanding one. You need emotional labor they never signed up to give, and the friction becomes unbearable, so they slip away, or they stay bitter, or they pretend everything is fine until the pressure cracks them. The people who stay actually stay through mess and inconvenience and their own exhaustion are rare because loyalty that survives discomfort is not a popular choice. It costs. Every day it costs. And most people will not pay that price unless something deeper than comfort is at stake, real obligation or genuine love or a sense of self that includes you as non-negotiable. The brutal part is this: you cannot shame someone into loyalty by guilt. You cannot argue them into it. You cannot make discomfort feel comfortable. You can only choose for yourself whether you want to be someone who pays that price or someone who counts the cost and walks. And then you can quietly notice who does the same for you. That gap between who you thought would stay and who actually does, that is where you finally meet reality. Loyalty without respect rots. You know the person who stays but keeps score, the one who shows up faithfully, who never leaves the room even when things get hard, but somehow their presence feels like a cage instead of a shelter. That is loyalty without respect, and it will poison everything it touches. Respect is the oxygen loyalty needs. Without it, you are left with obligation dressed up as devotion, resentment masquerading as commitment. You can be loyal to someone while thinking they are small, foolish, or beneath you, and for a while, nobody notices. The loyalty looks real from the outside, but inside, it corrodes. You start keeping a ledger of all the ways you have stayed faithful despite their failings. You do things for them while silently cataloging their mistakes, and they feel it. They feel the withholding, the judgment, the invisible superiority underneath your faithfulness. Respect means you actually believe in their capacity to grow, their worth as they are right now, their basic right to make their own choices even when you disagree. When that is gone, loyalty becomes a weapon wrapped in kindness. It is, I stayed with you anyway, which really means I had to punish you by staying. The betrayal often does not come when the loyal person leaves. It comes when they were never really there at all, just a body holding a grudge, a presence kept out of duty or fear or investment, not out of genuine belief in the other person. If you find yourself staying loyal but losing respect, you are already building the foundation for bitterness. The kind thing sometimes is to leave before loyalty becomes a slow poisoning of the space between you both. Because staying out of obligation while your regard for them shrinks is not love. It is a slow theft. Betrayal exposes your blind spots. You probably thought you knew someone. You thought you saw them clearly, their character, their limits, what they were capable of. Then the betrayal lands, and suddenly you're rewriting history, not theirs, but yours. All those moments you missed, the sign you rationalized away, the feeling you talked yourself out of, the pattern you never named until it was too late. What's brutal is realizing that the person didn't change. Your sight did. Betrayal is a flashlight aimed backward. illuminating everything you chose not to see and why you didn't see it. Maybe you needed them too much to look too hard. Maybe you were afraid of being alone if you admitted what you actually observed. Maybe you told yourself that trust meant not paying attention, as if doubt and care were somehow incompatible. The blind spot wasn't about intelligence or intuition. It was about what you were willing to risk losing. People often ask what they missed. The real question is what they permitted themselves to ignore. After betrayal, that permission gets yanked away, and you start noticing small inconsistencies in everyone now, even people who've done nothing wrong. You read between lines that have nothing written there. Part of that is healthy. You're recalibrating your antenna. But part of it is permanent damage. You've seen what you're capable of not seeing, and that knowledge doesn't leave you. The blind spot doesn't close, it just shifts. Now you're hypervigilant in some directions while remaining oblivious in others, scanning for the shape of the last betrayal instead of the one coming next. The real lesson isn't that you should have seen more, it's that you'll never see everything, and the people you trust most are often the ones you see least clearly. That asymmetry doesn't resolve. It just teaches you to hold your certainty a little lighter. The kindest get betrayed hardest. You know the type, the person who listens longer than they talk, who remembers what you said 3 months ago, who shows up at midnight with soup when you're sick. They don't keep a scoreboard. They forgive quickly. They assume the best. And here's what nobody warns them about. That generosity becomes the exact weapon that wounds them deepest. When a kind person gets betrayed, they don't just feel hurt, they feel stupid. They rerun every act of grace through a new lens, suddenly seeing it as naivete. Did I ignore the red flag because I was too trusting? Did I miss the lie because I was too busy giving them the benefit of the doubt? The betrayal lands harder because kindness creates a specific vulnerability. Kind people trust their own kindness as a guide. If I'm generous, surely they will be too. If I forgive, they'll know that means something. If I show up for them, they'll remember when I need them. But betrayal from someone they've loved, well, doesn't just break the relationship, it cracks their faith in kindness itself. And that's the real wound. Suddenly the world feels like it punishes the soft-hearted, and the kind person starts wondering if generosity was ever wisdom or just expensive foolishness. The deeper trap is this. They often blame themselves for being too open, too quick to believe, too willing to see the good. But here's the quiet truth that saves them. Kindness wasn't wasted just because it was misused. The waste happened in them, not in you. Your kindness was real. Their betrayal was real too. Those things can both be true, and that's what lets you stay kind without becoming reckless about who gets access to it. The goal isn't to harden, it's to choose better. Loyalty is proven in scarcity. You know that friend who shows up every single time you need them, the one who cancels plans with others to be there when you call at midnight, who remembers the small griefs you mentioned once in passing, who keeps showing up even when you've been distant or difficult. That person isn't loyal because loyalty is easy for them. They're loyal because they've chosen scarcity. They've chosen you over comfort, over convenience, over the pull of 100 other things demanding their time and energy. Real loyalty always costs something, and the person who loves you is the one willing to pay it when nobody's watching. After betrayal hits, you start noticing who actually stayed, and the truth becomes unmistakable. They didn't stay because you were perfect or because the friendship flowed without friction. They stayed because they made a deliberate trade-off over and over. They picked you when they could have picked ease. They picked consistency when inconsistency would have been simpler. They picked showing up when ghosting would have hurt less. Scarcity reveals everything. When someone has to choose between your needs and their own comfort, their choice becomes the truth that no words can hide. The people who betrayed you made a different choice entirely. They chose abundance over you, cycled through every other option first, and only came to you when nothing else was available. That's not a failure of connection. It's a failure of priority. So the next time you feel loved, don't just feel grateful for the presence. Feel grateful for the scarcity, for the deliberate absence of other options someone accepted just to keep you close. That sacrifice is the only real proof that exists. People choose sides for safety. Watch what happens the moment someone you both know gets accused of something. Your friends don't rally around truth. They rally around whoever feels safer to stand next to. The person with more friends picks the narrative. The person with fewer options gets abandoned first. It sounds brutal because it is, and yet you've probably done it yourself without even noticing. When two people collide and one of them is louder, richer, more popular, or simply more useful to your life, your mind doesn't weigh evidence. It calculates risk. Standing with the underdog means risking social friction, and friction costs. It costs invitations, inside jokes, the feeling of belonging to the pack. So people don't choose loyalty in those moments. They choose the path of least resistance. They choose whoever won't drag them down if things fall apart. After betrayal, you learn that the people who stayed weren't necessarily more principled than the ones who left. They were just positioned differently. Maybe you made them feel safer to keep than to lose. Maybe defending you cost them something they weren't willing to spend. Maybe they were waiting for a reason to leave anyway, and the chaos gave them one that felt justified. The hardest part is knowing that the same calculus might apply in reverse, that your own loyalty might be more fragile than you thought when the wind shifts, when the costs add up, when staying gets too expensive. Safety isn't moral, it's just human geometry. And once you see that dynamic playing out in real time, you realize sides are chosen not by conscience, but by distance, by stakes, by who has more to lose. Broken trust changes your baseline. You know that feeling when you finally relax in a house, stop locking the bathroom door, stop checking if the front door is locked twice, actually believe the alarm is on? Betrayal is when someone walks through that unlocked door. But here is what nobody tells you. Even after you change the locks and they never come back, you never quite return to that baseline of ease. Your nervous system remembers. You become the person who checks twice now, the person who reads the text 3 times before believing the tone, the person who hears cancellation plans as early warning signs. And it is not paranoia exactly. It is recalibration. Your brain learned something real. It learned that people can smile and lie at the same time, that intimacy can be cover for selfishness, that the person who hurt you most was often the one you trusted most easily. So trust does not return to factory settings. When you trust again, and you will, because humans are built that way, it lives in a different part of you now. Lighter, more conditional, less like faith and more like a provisional agreement you renew each day. This is not bitterness, though it can feel like it at first. It is wisdom that came through pain. Your baseline has shifted because your information has shifted. The people you meet after will feel this shift sometimes. They will ask why you hold back, why you verify, why you seem to need more proof, and the kindest among them will understand that this is not about them. It is about what you learned when someone taught you that loyalty and affection are not the same thing, that looking someone in the eye is not a guarantee of honesty. You are not broken. You are recalibrated. Loyalty is a mirror, not a bond. You show up for someone consistently, and you assume they'll feel the weight of that. That loyalty builds like compound interest, each act stacking into something they can't ignore. Then they betray you, and the illusion shatters. They were never seeing your loyalty at all. They were seeing themselves reflected in it. When you stayed late to help, they saw someone who needed them. When you kept their secret, they saw proof they were worth protecting. Your devotion wasn't a bond between you. It was a mirror they held up to feel better about who they were. And mirrors shatter the moment someone else comes along and offers a clearer reflection. The brutal part hits hardest when you realize the people who betray you most painfully are the ones you were most loyal to, because that's when the mirror was brightest. You were reflecting back exactly who they wanted to be, not asking who they actually were. After betrayal, you start to see it differently. Real loyalty isn't about what you give. It's about whether the other person is actually looking at you, not just at themselves and you. Some people are only capable of seeing you when you're useful as a reflection. They're not being malicious. They're just not built for mutuality. They can't tell the difference between love and narcissism because narcissism feels like love when you're the one being mirrored. So here's what sticks. Before you pour loyalty into someone, ask yourself if they're actually seeing you or if they're just enjoying the view of themselves. That question, asked early and honestly, saves you the betrayal that teaches it too late. The people worth your loyalty are the rare ones who can look away from their own reflection long enough to see you standing there. Your secrets migrate to enemies. You told him something you'd never told anyone else. A fear, a failure, a moment you weren't proud of. You told him because you trusted him. Then something shifted. A disagreement, a cooling. A betrayal so small you almost missed it, but large enough that he wasn't your person anymore. And here is what happens next. That secret you buried doesn't stay buried. It lives in his pocket now, and when he's angry, or when someone asks, or when he needs leverage, it becomes currency. He doesn't have to use it directly. He just has to mention it to the right person at the right time, and suddenly your vulnerability is public knowledge. Your confession becomes his ammunition. The cruelest part is that he knows exactly where it lands because you drew him a map when you first told him. You showed him what scared you most, and now that map belongs to someone who no longer wishes you well. This is why betrayal stings differently than simple rejection. You didn't just lose someone, you lost someone who holds your confessions. And the thing that keeps you up is knowing you can't take those words back. They exist now in someone else's hands, waiting. So before you tell someone your deepest truth, ask yourself what happens if they become an enemy. If the answer terrifies you, maybe that secret stays with you a little longer. Intimacy and trust are not the same thing. You can share vulnerability with someone and still be wrong about whether they earned the right to hold it. The real lesson is harder. The people closest to us hold the sharpest weapons, and the distance between confidant and adversary can shrink in a single season. Guard your deepest truths not out of cynicism, but out of respect for what they're worth. The truly loyal ask for nothing. You know that friend who shows up without keeping score? The one who never mentions what they gave up to be there, never reminds you of the favor they did, never makes you feel like you owe them, that silence is not because they forgot. It is because they made a choice before the moment even arrived. They decided that if they were going to do this, they would do it clean. No ledger, no later currency to cash in. The transaction ends when the act ends. Most of us are not wired that way. We give, then we wait. We text, then we notice the read receipt. We show up, then we hold on to the invisible receipt and pull it out when we need something back. That is not loyalty. That is a business deal wrapped in affection. Real loyalty is stranger. It asks nothing because it does not expect the relationship to balance on a spreadsheet. It knows the give will be unequal. It knows sometimes you will take more than you offer, and it stays anyway. Here is what makes this brutal. When you finally spot a truly loyal person, you will feel guilty because you have been keeping score with everyone else in your life, and you will recognize you are not that person for most people. You will see the gap between how you loved and how they loved you. And that gap will sting in a way that has nothing to do with their betrayal and everything to do with your own. The truly loyal person does not make you feel small because they are weak. They make you feel small because they are free and you are not. Not yet. So the question becomes, what would change if you stopped waiting for the receipt to come due? Betrayal often wears a smile. You remember the lunch before everything fell apart. They laughed at your jokes, asked about your family, texted you a meme later that night. Then 3 weeks down the line, you find out they were already planning how to use what you told them, not in anger, but in that exact moment you thought you were safe. This is the cruelest shape betrayal takes. It doesn't arrive as a slap. It arrives as warmth. The person who betrays you from a smile has rehearsed something you never saw coming because they didn't tip their hand with coldness or distance. They kept showing up. They kept asking. They kept the door open while they were already walking out the back window. And that's what makes it stick. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that the person you trusted was simultaneously comfortable enough to destroy you. They didn't need to become a stranger first. The cruelest ones never do. They stay close enough that you mistake their presence for protection. So here is what the hard way teaches. The biggest threats don't announce themselves by withdrawal. They announce themselves by consistency, by familiarity, by making you feel seen while they're cataloging your weaknesses. When you start healing, you'll recognize a new kind of caution. Not the kind that walls you off, but the kind that lets you hold people close while keeping one eye on whether their warmth has a temperature that actually matches their actions. Loyalty is never proven by a single good moment. It's proven by 10,000 small moments that all point the same direction. And the ones who matter, their consistency never changes between the private room and the public one because they have nothing to hide from you. Proximity is not partnership. You can sit across from someone every single day and still be invisible to them. You can share a kitchen, a bed, a decade of mornings, and never once be chosen when it matters. That is the thing nobody tells you after betrayal. The person closest to you is not always the person most loyal to you. Proximity is just geography. It is habit. It is the accident of being there. But partnership is the decision to be there, to see someone clearly, to act on what you see even when it costs you. Most people mistake duration for depth. They think that because they have known someone forever, that person has their back. Yet I have seen spouses betray spouses after 20 years. I have seen best friends disappear the moment the cameras went off, and I have seen strangers move mountains for people they barely knew because they actually meant what they said. After betrayal, you start noticing this everywhere. the person in your life constantly making plans without you, the one who always has an excuse when you need them, the one who listens but never remembers what you said last week. They are not far away. They are right there, sitting close enough to touch, but they stopped being a partner somewhere along the way, and you were so busy not being alone that you did not notice the partnership died first. The antidote is not distance. It is clarity. Stop measuring loyalty by how long someone has been around. Start measuring it by what they have done when you were not looking, what they chose when it was hard, whether they remembered who you were when you were at your worst. That is partnership. Everything else is just company. Loyalty erodes under temptation. You know that feeling when someone offers you something you want badly, a job, attention, money, a way out, and suddenly the person you swore you'd never leave doesn't feel quite as irreplaceable? That's not evil. That's just what happens when loyalty meets real friction. We tell ourselves we're faithful until the test gets expensive. A friend you've had for years feels like a slower investment when a faster one glitters in front of you. A partner feels less essential when someone new makes you feel alive again. The betrayer rarely thinks of themselves as disloyal in that moment. They think they're just being practical or honest or finally taking what they deserve. Loyalty isn't a rock. It's a choice that only stays solid when the alternatives don't look better. The harsh part is that most of us believe we're more loyal than we actually are because we've never faced the right temptation yet. The person who left you probably meant every promise they made before the pressure came, but promises are only as strong as the reason you keep them. Remove the reason, make the betrayal profitable enough or risky enough to avoid or comfortable enough to rationalize, and watch what people do. This isn't cynicism. It's just recognizing that loyalty requires active work, constant choice, and honestly, a lack of better options. When someone stays faithful to you through a temptation big enough that you'll never know about it, that's when you've seen their actual character. Most of the time, you'll never see that test. You'll just see the moment they stopped choosing you and realize they never chose you the way you thought they had. What you're left with then is not anger at their weakness. It's the quiet reckoning that you didn't know the price of their loyalty because you never asked what it would cost. You overestimated your importance. The person who betrayed you didn't wake up thinking about you nearly as much as you thought about them. That's the cut that lands different because you were rehearsing conversations in your head while they were living their own life, making their own choices, and yes, eventually choosing someone or something else without the weight you'd assigned to yourself in their internal world. You were a supporting character in a story where you'd cast yourself as the lead. They were the lead of their own story, and you were a chapter or maybe just a paragraph they're still figuring out how to explain. This isn't about your worth as a person. It's about the gap between the role you imagined having in someone's life and the actual role you held. You told yourself you mattered more than you did. Not because you're unlovable, but because betrayal reveals that other people have their own gravity, their own desires, their own fears that have nothing to do with disappointing you. The betrayer probably didn't lie awake, weighing your suffering the way you replayed their cruelty. They moved forward. They built a new narrative. And that asymmetry, that you cared more than they did, that your internal experience of the relationship was bigger than theirs, that's what stings hardest. The brutal clarity is that you were more invested in the idea of your place in their life than they ever were in keeping you there. Once you sit with that, something shifts. You stop blaming them for not being what you needed them to be because you finally notice you'd given them a role they never auditioned for. The next time you build intimacy with someone, try smaller, not safer, smaller. Let them reveal their actual capacity for you before you hand them the starring role. Grief hides beneath your anger. You know that moment when someone's name comes up and you feel your chest tighten, your jaw clench, and suddenly you're replaying something they did months ago, building the case, sharpening the details, letting the heat rise. That fury isn't really about the small thing. It's the disguise grief wears when it doesn't have language for itself. After betrayal, anger is easier than sadness. It makes you feel powerful instead of hollow, wronged instead of abandoned, and it keeps you tethered to the person who hurt you through rage instead of admitting they're gone from your life. So you stay angry. You cycle through the same old grievances, the same old what they did to me, because anger is a way to keep the ghost in the room. Grief, by contrast, asks you to feel the absence. It asks you to stop defending and start accepting that someone you trusted is no longer who you thought they were, and that changes everything. The brutal truth is that you might spend years in that anger loop without ever touching the real wound underneath. The loss of who you believed them to be, the loss of the future you thought you'd share, the loss of faith in your own judgment. Anger will protect you from all of that right up until the day it stops working and you're just exhausted, replaying the same scenes with no one left to convince. When you catch yourself cycling through the same rage, try a different move. Pause and ask what you're actually grieving, not what they did. Mourn the person they were supposed to be. Mourn the version of yourself that believed in them completely. That shift from prosecuting them to acknowledging what was taken is when the anger finally has permission to soften into something that can actually heal you. Loyalty is tested by better offers. You know that moment when someone you trusted suddenly becomes distant and you find out later they got recruited by something better? A better job, a richer partner, a friend group with more status. The weird part isn't that they left, it's that you didn't see it coming, even though part of you probably should have. Loyalty isn't some fixed thing you can measure in a beaker. It exists inside a calculation, and the calculation changes the moment the variables shift. When you are offering enough attention, enough reward, enough future promise, the loyalty felt real and unconditional. The second something better showed up, suddenly all those promises they made felt lighter than air. This isn't cynicism, it's mathematics. People don't betray you because they're evil. They betray you because the math changed and they optimized for a new variable. The brutal part is that most people don't even realize they're doing it. They'll tell themselves a story, you weren't listening anymore, you stopped trying, you let things slip. And they'll almost believe it, really sell it to themselves, but underneath, they're just following the incentive, moving toward what looks better. The hard truth is that loyalty only survives when it remains the rational choice. If you want to see who stays when the better offer arrives, you have to become and remain the better offer. Not just in the beginning when novelty still burns hot, but every single day afterward. That means you have to keep growing, keep showing up, keep being worth more than the alternative. Is it exhausting? Yes. Unfair? Often. But that's how loyalty actually works in a world where everyone is calculating. Some people collect loyalty. You've probably met them, the kind of person who mentions their loyal friends constantly, who reminds you of favors in passing conversation, who keeps a running mental tally of who showed up and who didn't. They treat loyalty like a museum curator treats artifacts. You're mounted, labeled, displayed. But here's what makes them different from someone who simply values connection. They don't actually need your loyalty. They need the proof of it, the reassurance that they matter enough that you'll stick around no matter what. It's less about you and more about what you represent in their collection. Evidence of their worth, their permanence, their gravitational pull on the world. These people will keep you close, not because they love you, but because your steadiness makes them feel real. What makes them dangerous is how charming they usually are. They'll ask about your life like they genuinely care, remember small details, show up at exactly the right moments. All of it reads as authentic because it partly is, but it's also strategic, every piece fitting into a larger self-portrait they're constantly painting. You're a brushstroke in the story of how lovable they are. Then comes the moment that matters. You need something back, and the relationship can't orbit them for a single rotation. That's when you learn whether you were ever truly seen or simply collected. If you felt that specific sting, the sense that someone was proud of you the way they'd be proud of a trophy, trust it completely. Real loyalty doesn't need an audience or a scorebook. The people actually worth your time aren't building museums. They're building lives with you, not monuments to themselves. Betrayal teaches selective trust. You wake up one morning after a hard betrayal and realize you are no longer the person who trusts everyone equally. That version of you is gone. What replaces it is something sharper, not cynicism, but discernment. You start noticing who shows up when stakes are low, who vanishes when things get messy, who remembers what you said 3 months ago without you having to remind them. Trust stops being a blanket you throw over people and becomes a precise instrument you calibrate person by person, moment by moment. Some people earn your trust with small, consistent actions over years. Others blow it in one careless conversation. The sting teaches you that trust is not a debt you owe anyone just for showing up. It is something they have to earn and keep earning. You hold different people at different distances without guilt. Your closest friend gets your full story. A colleague gets warmth but not secrets. Someone you just met gets courtesy but not vulnerability. This is not coldness. It is wisdom. Betrayal burns away the fantasy that loyalty is transactional, that if you are good to someone, they will automatically be good back. People are inconsistent. Circumstances change. Hunger, fear, ego, and opportunity shift people in ways you cannot predict. So you stop betting everything on one person's character and instead build a portfolio of trust. You diversify, you watch, you stay curious about who people actually are, not who you hoped they would be. Selective trust is not about keeping score or staying bitter. It is about loving people wisely and protecting yourself from devastation that comes from misplaced faith. You learn to give what you can afford to lose and trust at the speed of demonstrated reliability. That is survival. Loyalty cannot be demanded. You know the moment when someone says, "After everything I've done for you, you owe me this," and suddenly the air goes cold. That sentence is the death of whatever loyalty existed. Loyalty lives in the space where choice is free. The second you swing the word "owe" into the room, you have already lost. It stops being loyalty and becomes obligation, and obligation breeds resentment the way heat breeds mold. People feel the trap immediately, even if they can't name it. Your body knows the difference between "I want to show up for you" and "I have to show up for you." One feels like connection, the other feels like a cage. The people who try hardest to demand loyalty are usually the ones most afraid of losing it, terrified of being forgotten or abandoned, so they pull tighter, sight past favors, remind you of sacrifices, and with each reminder, they push the other person further away. It works like a ratchet in reverse. Betrayal teaches you something sharp. Loyalty cannot be purchased, guaranteed, or enforced. It can only be earned continuously by being the kind of person someone wants to choose. And even then, it is fragile. What changes after you're betrayed is that you stop trying to own other people's loyalty. You stop keeping receipts. You stop saying, "But I was there for you." You start asking instead, "Do they want to be here?" That question, asked quietly and without anger, is the only one that ever mattered anyway. Guilt fades faster in the guilty. Watch the person who wronged you a few weeks later, lighter, unburdened, moving through their days with a kind of relief. You're still holding the stone. This isn't forgiveness, it's something meaner. The betrayer's guilt is like a storm, fierce, then gone. They rewrite the story brick by brick. It wasn't that bad. You provoked it. They were struggling. And each small justification removes another weight. Meanwhile, you're rerunning the moment at 2 a.m., which means you're doing their emotional work for them. Their guilt had nowhere to attach because they could reshape it, but your hurt has your whole life to grab onto, every memory, every trust decision, every calculation about who you let close now. They wake up thinking about you maybe once with a pinch of sadness, then move to brunch. Your body still remembers the moment, the words, the silence that followed. This is why betrayed people seem angrier than betrayers, not because you're actually angrier, but because you're more awake to the unfairness of the timing. Their guilt came with an expiration date built in. Yours doesn't work that way. You're not waiting for their conscience to catch up because it won't. And the sooner you know that in your bones, the sooner you stop bleeding into the space where their accountability should be. The real brutal truth is that their lightness and your heaviness were never on a scale that could balance. Stop expecting the math to work out. Stop waiting for them to feel what you feel. Stop thinking their eventual sadness will somehow make this cleaner. That's when you actually start building something new. Not from their guilt, but from your own clarity about what you deserve. Your value drops when too accessible. Think about the person who texts back in 3 seconds, who cancels their plans for you every time, who is always there. Notice how quickly you stop appreciating it? That availability, which used to feel like proof they loved you, starts to feel like a default setting, something you can take for granted. The second someone knows they can reach you at midnight or that you'll rearrange your Tuesday for them, the gesture loses its weight. It becomes expected, not extraordinary. This is not about playing games or being deliberately cold. It is about something darker. We humans tend to value what costs us something, what requires us to negotiate, what might slip away. When you are infinitely available, you signal that you have no other options, no other life. No scarcity, and scarcity is what creates desire. The person who keeps boundaries, who has their own world, who sometimes says no, they become interesting. They become worth something. After betrayal, people realize they spent years being the accessible one, the dependable one, the safe choice, and they were taken for granted, sometimes mocked in private for trying so hard. Meanwhile, the person who was mysteriously busy, who didn't text back for hours, who kept something back, that person held power they never even knew they had. The trap is that this does not mean you should become cold or unavailable as punishment, but it does mean recognizing this. Loyalty is not measured by how much of yourself you give away. It is measured by how intentional you are about it. Give your time, your presence, your love, but make it matter. Let it cost you something real. When people know that your presence is earned, not guaranteed, they will finally see your value, and they will act like it. Loyalty is quiet, never loud. You know that person who actually shows up for you, not the one who performs loyalty on social media, not the one who needs you to know about their sacrifice. The real ones move in silence. They text you at 2 a.m. when you're spiraling. They remember the small thing you mentioned once. They show up to the hospital without being asked. They don't need you to know how loyal they are because loyalty isn't a reputation to build. It's just what they do when nobody's watching and nobody will ever know. Betrayal, though, betrayal screams. People who betray you will gaslight you into thinking you imagine the loyalty. They'll justify themselves loudly to mutual friends. They'll perform remorse so theatrically you start questioning whether they did anything wrong at all. But the loyal ones stay quiet. They don't keep a ledger. They don't remind you of what they sacrificed. They don't make you feel indebted for being human. And here's what betrayal teaches you. All that noise you mistook for loyalty was just noise. The actual loyalty was happening in the silence, in the decisions nobody made you bear witness to, in the times they chose you when choosing, you cost them something and they never told you about the cost. So when you're rebuilding trust after being hurt, stop listening for the loud promises and elaborate explanations. Stop confusing performance with presence. Watch for the ones who just quietly keep showing up, asking nothing, expecting nothing. That quiet consistency, that's not just loyalty, that's the whole thing. The people worth keeping aren't the ones who announce themselves. People rewrite you after leaving. You probably know someone who was quietly loved, then suddenly became the villain in their own story. 6 months after they left, they're unrecognizable in the narratives that float around, meaner, colder, more selfish than anyone who actually lived with them would recognize. The person doing the rewriting isn't lying exactly. They're just adjusting the film of memory until it matches their new emotional truth. That joke you made seems cruel now. That boundary you set becomes proof you never cared. The quiet evenings together vanish in favor of all the times they weren't there. Betrayal gives everyone permission to misremember you, and the brain does this work automatically. It needs your exit to mean something, so it scans backward for evidence that justifies it. A person who leaves doesn't just leave the room. They leave a version of you behind that gets smaller and sharper with every retelling. You become a cautionary tale. You become proof they made the right choice. And the cruelest part? You have no voice in how you're written out of the story. You can't defend yourself against a narrative you don't hear. The person who rewrites you isn't necessarily mean. They're protecting themselves by turning you into someone easier to leave behind. Understanding that doesn't fix the rewriting, but it does free you from the lie that you did something wrong. Sometimes the story they tell about you says far more about what they needed to believe than who you actually were. The real wound isn't the betrayal itself. It's being erased and replaced with a fiction that serves their survival. That rewriting will keep happening whether you know about it or not, which means your only move is to stop writing yourself into their version of events at all. Betrayal reveals rehearsed lies. You know that feeling when someone finally slips up and says something they didn't mean to say, the kind of thing that makes you realize they've been practicing their story, polishing it, running it over in their head so many times that the edges should be smooth, but instead, under pressure, the rehearsal cracks. A word lands wrong, a timeline doesn't match. The explanation they've given you 100 times suddenly wobbles because they're tired, angry, or cornered. That moment, that fracture, it's not the betrayal itself. It's the evidence that they had time to prepare their version, to edit it, to rehearse it. And that preparation is what cuts deepest, because it means the lie wasn't a slip. It was a choice they made and remade. Before betrayal, you assume people are improvising their honesty. After betrayal, you start to notice how much of what they told you fits together too perfectly, plays too smoothly, never leaves room for the kind of messy contradictions that real, unguarded truth tends to carry. The person who loves you badly but honestly fumbles. They backtrack. They say, I don't know, or I messed up. The person rehearsing has their story arc down, and when you finally catch them, they don't look surprised. They look tired, like they've been holding their breath for months, waiting for you to find the gap. This is the brutal part. By the time you see the lie crack open, they've already lived a whole shadow life in it. They've practiced saying your name while thinking about someone else. They've rehearsed, I love you so many times it sounds like muscle memory. And you, the whole time, were listening to a performance, not a confession. That's what loyalty learns after betrayal. How to hear the difference between words someone meant and words someone practiced. Loyalty survives on shared cost. Think about the friendships that actually held when everything fell apart. The ones that didn't just disappear the moment you stopped being useful or fun. What made the difference? Almost always, it was that both of you had already paid something. Time, vulnerability, a difficult choice made together, a secret kept, a night spent on the phone when neither of you had energy left. Loyalty isn't built on promises, it's built on the mutual recognition that you've both already spent something you can't get back. When you betray someone after shared cost, you are not just ending a friendship, you are making that cost feel like a waste. That is why the betrayal hits so much harder when it comes from someone close. The closer they are, the more you have both spent. A stranger who disappoints you? Disappointing. Someone who has sat with your grief, who knows your worst thought, who showed up when it was inconvenient. That cost creates a kind of gravity, and when that person walks, it feels like they are retroactively invalidating every dollar of that investment. This is why so many people stay in bad situations longer than they should. Not because they love the person, but because they have already paid too much to leave. And this is also why real loyalty, when you find it, feels so rare and so heavy. It means someone has looked at all the costs they have sunk into you, all the ways you could have betrayed them and didn't, and they chose to stay anyway. Loyalty does not survive on hope or good intentions. It survives on the fact that you both have skin in the game. The moment one person stops feeling that weight, the whole thing tips. Withdrawal precedes disloyalty. Someone stops texting back at normal speed. Conversation shifts from late-night rambling to weather updates. They're there, but smaller somehow. Less of them in the room, even when they're sitting across from you. That hollowing out is not the betrayal itself. It's the dress rehearsal. They're testing what distance feels like, how guilt tastes, what it costs to care less. The withdrawal is always the audition for disloyalty, and most people give themselves permission to leave long before they actually go. They need the emotional room to breathe without you before they can breathe without you entirely. What makes this brutal is how invisible it can feel at first. You might catch yourself wondering if you're being paranoid, if they're just stressed or busy, if the silence means nothing. But silence where there used to be overflow always means something. The person who loves you shows up in small ways even on their worst days. The person building an exit shows up in fewer ways, in smaller increments, testing whether you'll notice or let them slip. And here's what lands hard. You probably did notice. That tightness in your chest, that moment you asked yourself if everything was okay and accepted the surface level, yeah, fine, you felt the withdrawal happening. You just didn't want to name it, because naming it means the next part is real. The kindest thing you can do now is not to pretend the withdrawal didn't happen or to chase them back into closeness through effort and proof. It means recognizing that distance is a choice they're already making. And sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is let them have the leaving they've already started. Pay attention to the small silences. They're not accidents, they're breadcrumbs leading somewhere you don't want to follow. The betrayer needs a villain. You notice it happening so quietly that at first you think you are losing your mind. The person who hurt you starts rewriting what actually occurred, and somewhere in that new version, you become the problem. Not because you did anything different yesterday, because they need you to be the problem now. A betrayer cannot sleep soundly in a story where they are simply selfish or afraid or small. So they build you into a villain instead. You were controlling. You were distant. You failed to appreciate them. You made them feel invisible. None of it has to be factual. It just has to be loud enough to drown out the part where they chose to hurt you deliberately. And here is what cuts deepest. They actually believe it, not as a calculated deception, as their genuine truth. Your faithfulness becomes their evidence that you suffocated them. Your pain becomes proof you never truly saw them. They are not lying to you. They are lying to themselves, and you are simply the necessary character in that story. This is why confronting them with what actually happened almost never lands. You are not arguing against facts. You are fighting their entire identity, their right to see themselves as good. If you are not the villain, then they have to be. And most people will torch every bridge before they accept that math. The only path forward is to stop applying for the role, stop explaining yourself, stop trying to prove you are not what they have decided you are. Let them keep their story intact. Build your own instead, one where you are neither sufferer nor criminal, just someone who loves someone who was not ready. And that truth was enough to know what you do next. Loyalty ignored becomes resentment. You show up, you adjust, you quiet your own needs because theirs mattered more. And for a while, that felt like love, like proof you were the good one. But then something shifts, not dramatically. You just stop offering the same thing. You're still there, still present, but the warmth has a chill running through it now. That chill is what happens when loyalty gets treated like a given instead of a gift. It's not the betrayal that feels sharp in that moment. It's the realization that all those small surrenders you made, the plans you canceled, the friends you deprioritized, the parts of yourself you folded away, never registered as anything but expected. Resentment doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives like fog, quiet and creeping, until one day you notice you're keeping score in a way you swore you never would. You start remembering every time they didn't ask how you were, every time your effort went unacknowledged, every time they took your steadiness for granted and offered nothing in return but the assumption that you'd always be there. The brutal part is that you can't even blame them for not noticing. You never told them it mattered. You never named the cost. You just paid it in silence and expected gratitude to follow. But loyalty that goes unwitnessed, unvalued, unreciprocated doesn't strengthen a bond. It poisons it slowly from the inside. The person who gave too much and was thanked too little becomes the person who gives nothing at all, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. That's when you know the relationship has already shifted. The betrayal happened long before they did anything wrong. It happened the moment you stopped mattering and they stopped noticing you were still trying. You cannot love someone into staying. There's a moment most of us have lived where you're doing everything right, showing up, being gentle, rebuilding trust after a crack, and they're already gone. Not physically, they're still there in the kitchen, in bed, in the car, but the thing that made them stay has disconnected. You've been trying to solve this with love, as if love is a master key that unlocks every door, softens every resistance, fixes every fracture. It doesn't. Love is not a spell or collateral or a down payment on someone else's loyalty. Someone can feel exactly how much you care and still choose to leave, because caring about someone and wanting to build a life with them live in two entirely different parts of the heart. You can be the most devoted, attentive, forgiving person in their life and still lose them because staying is not a response to how much you love. It's a choice rooted in whether they want to be there, whether they see a future, whether they're running from something inside themselves or towards something else. When someone is leaving, what you do matters far less than what they've already decided. Love doesn't override their autonomy. It doesn't tip the scales or make them owe you their presence or their effort. Some people leave people they love deeply. Some people stay with people they don't. Loyalty and love are not the same currency, and you cannot pay one to buy the other. The hardest lesson after betrayal is accepting that your love was real and complete, and it still wasn't the thing that mattered most to them. That's not a reflection of how you loved. It's a reflection of who they are and what they're capable of choosing when the door opens. Learning to live with that distinction is what finally lets you stop trying to love harder and start protecting yourself instead. Convenient truths feel like betrayal. Your friend suddenly remembers they never promised to show up. Not really, they say. They were vague about it. They never actually committed. And just like that, the story shifts backward, rewriting what you both knew was said. This is the slow knife. When someone you trusted rebuilds the past to suit their present and calls it honesty, it lands like betrayal because it is a betrayal, just a quieter one. They're not lying about facts so much as they're lying about what they meant. And somehow that feels worse because you can't prove it. You remember their tone. You remember the look. You remember feeling safe enough to believe them. But none of that lives in a text message you can screenshot. Convenient truths are the betrayal nobody warns you about because there's no dramatic moment, just a slow erosion where someone you care about decides their own comfort matters more than the weight of their word. And the hardest part isn't even the lie itself. It's watching them do it calmly, even kindly, as if they're being reasonable, as if you're the one being unreasonable for holding them to what you both heard. This teaches you something sharp. Loyalty isn't just about big promises kept. It's about small ones too. It's about someone resisting the temptation to rewrite their own history just because it would be easier. It's someone choosing to own what they said, even when owning it costs them. When they don't, when they reach for that convenient truth and smile while they do it, that's when you learn that betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, and by then, you're already doubting what you heard. Betrayal recalibrates your instincts. Before it happened, you trusted your gut. Someone was warm, generous, familiar. Your nervous system said safe, so you went all in. After betrayal, that same gut starts screaming at ghosts. A friend cancels plans and you spiral into whether they ever liked you. A partner takes longer to text and you're already building an exit strategy. The betrayal didn't just hurt you, it rewired your early warning system to detect threats that aren't there yet, or may never be there at all. You're running on hypervigilance now, reading subtext in every pause, suspicion in every smile. The trap is that this recalibration feels like wisdom. You tell yourself you're smarter now, less naive, finally awake. But what you're actually running is a trauma script, not prophecy. Your instincts aren't sharper, they're just louder and more reactive. They're scanning for the shape of the old wound in every new person. And here's what makes it cruel. The people who love you now are paying the tax on what someone else did. They have to prove loyalty against an invisible bar that keeps moving higher. You withdraw before they can leave. You test them. You armor yourself so thoroughly that connection itself becomes impossible. The real recalibration, the one worth doing, isn't about trusting no one. It's about learning the difference between a genuine red flag and your own nervous system firing on old memories. It's about giving new people a chance to show up as themselves, not as understudy to the person who broke you. That takes patience you don't think you have, and faith in your own judgment that feels obscene. But that's the recalibration that actually protects you instead of just sealing you off from the people who might actually stay. Loyalty gets remembered selectively. Think back to someone you trusted completely, someone who showed up 1,000 times quietly and then one day didn't. Watch what happens in your mind now. That absence doesn't balance against all the presence. Instead, your brain files away the betrayal as proof of who they always were, and suddenly all those earlier moments get rewritten. You remember them differently now, less as genuine care, more as performance or obligation you misread. The brutal thing is, they're probably doing the same thing to you. If you hurt them, every kindness you showed gets filed under manipulation or trying to keep up appearances. Your loyalty becomes a footnote to their story of your selfishness. This isn't malice, it's how memory actually works. Our brains hunt backward for patterns that explain why we got hurt, and the pattern that sticks is always the one that feels true now, not the one that was true then. A friend who was there for you 50 times gets remembered for the one time they weren't. A parent who loved you imperfectly becomes proof they never loved you at all. A partner who was loyal until they weren't becomes someone you never really knew. You'll do this too. After betrayal, you'll rewrite your own history, turning past moments of connection into evidence of blindness. What matters is knowing it happens, that memory is not a tape recorder but a courtroom, and betrayal is the verdict that makes you rehear everything. You can't stop this rewriting entirely, but you can notice when it's happening and ask, am I remembering this person as they were or as the ending made them? That question won't erase what happened, but it might let you hold the full story instead of just the scar. Envy corrodes allegiance. You watch your friend get the promotion you wanted, the same friend you told everything to. That night, you scroll past their celebration post and feel something sharp twist in your chest. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, but a cold distance you've never felt before. You still text them, you still show up, but something real has died in the room between you, and that something is loyalty. Envy doesn't announce itself as betrayal. It sneaks in as a whisper that they didn't deserve it more than you, or that they got lucky while you got passed over, or that maybe they bragged to the right person and that's why they won. Your mind builds a story where their win becomes your loss, where their success feels like proof the world loves them more than you. Once that story settles, you can't quite look at them the same way anymore. You've become loyal to the feeling of being overlooked instead of loyal to the actual person standing in front of you. The cruelest part is that you'll never tell them this is happening. You keep the smile intact while the root underneath dies, and they'll sense it because people always do. They'll wonder what they did wrong when really they just became a mirror for your own hunger and ache. The move isn't to eliminate envy. That's not human. It's to name it while it's still small, before it hardens into something that looks like betrayal from the outside. When you feel that twist, don't pretend it's about them. Say it to yourself first. I wanted that too, and I didn't get it. That tiny honesty, that unflinching look at your own disappointment, is the only thing that stops envy from rotting the foundation you built with someone who mattered. People stay loyal to who you were. You grow, you change your mind about things, you soften in some places, harden in others. You realize a belief you held for a decade was garbage, or you finally stand up for yourself in a way that terrifies the people who loved your smallness. And here's what almost no one warns you about. The people who were loyal to version 1.0 of you will sometimes feel genuinely betrayed by version 2.0. They don't say it outright. That would require naming the grief, but you'll notice it in the way their texts get shorter, or how they bring up the old you with a wistfulness that stings like a paper cut. They loved who you were so completely that your becoming someone new feels like a loss to them, like a compact was broken. It's not malice most of the time, it's exactly grief, the real kind. You promised in the invisible contract of being known that you would stay predictable, that the thing they fell in love with wouldn't dissolve into something unrecognizable. Sometimes loyalty was never actually to you. It was to the role you played in their life, the way you made them feel about themselves, the safety of having someone exactly where they expected you to be. Real loyalty survives your becoming. It's rare enough that when you find it, you'll recognize it immediately. The people who cheer when you change, who don't need the old version of you to feel secure in the bond. Everyone else, they were loyal to a ghost, and now that ghost is gone, and they're angry at you for it. Betrayal isolates you before it strikes. You feel it coming in small ways. A friend stops asking about your work. Someone who used to text at midnight goes quiet. The person who knew your worst days suddenly seems busy when you call. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, reading too much into timing and tone, but your body knows something is off. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It whispers first through distance, through the soft withdrawal of attention, through the way someone starts living a version of your friendship in their head before they live it in real life. They're already halfway out the door when you're still talking like everything is fine. And here's what makes it cruel. You feel the loneliness before you understand why. You start small-talking people you used to be raw with. You edit yourself more, say less, test the waters to see if they're still safe. You pull back just enough to avoid the sting that you sense is coming, which means you're doing the abandonment yourself, softly, quietly, before they can do it loud. The isolation isn't just what happens after the betrayal lands, it's the slow suffocation that happens in the gap between when they change their mind about you and when they tell you. You're alone in a room full of people you thought you could trust, and they're already rehearsing how they'll explain why they couldn't stay. By the time the actual betrayal comes, you've already been grieving for weeks or months, protecting yourself from something you felt coming. That's the real trap. You've already lost the person while they're still sitting across from you, looking you in the eye like nothing is wrong, and the loneliness you feel isn't just coming. It's already wrapped around you like a familiar cold. Tested loyalty reveals the hierarchy. You have two friends. One drops everything when your world breaks, cancels plans, sits with you in the wreck, asks almost nothing in return. The other sends a text that lands with warmth but disappears when the crisis stretches into weeks. Neither is bad, but when the dust settles, you suddenly see them as they actually are, not as you imagine them to be. That clarity is what betrayal gives you. It's the X-ray of your inner circle. Suffering doesn't make people loyal. It reveals who already was. The people who show up aren't discovering some new moral muscle they didn't know they had. They're simply doing what they were always willing to do. You just never needed to ask until the bottom dropped out. And here is the part that stings. The ranking you discover isn't always the ranking you expected. Someone peripheral shocks you with steadiness. Someone central quietly fades. Your loyalty, the kind you give, gets ranked too, sometimes brutally. You learn what you're actually willing to do, not what you think you should. That hierarchy you see in others mirrors a hierarchy in yourself. Your people are not ranked by affection or history, but by what they do when things get hard. Once you see that pattern, you start making different choices. You stop pouring into the peripheral people who say the right things. You lean harder into the quiet ones who simply stay. The betrayal hurt, but the clarity is almost worse because now you can't pretend the ranking doesn't exist. You can't unknow how little some people will risk for you or how much some people will risk for almost nothing in return. The forgiving get betrayed twice. You sit across from someone who broke you. They cry, they apologize, they say they've changed, that it will never happen again. And you, because you have a good heart or because you're tired of holding anger, you nod and say, okay, you forgive. Then, a few months or a few years later, the same person does it again. Not always in the same way, but the same betrayal underneath. Different outfit, same wound. That second hit lands harder than the first because now you're not just grieving what they did. You're grieving the forgiveness itself, the choice you made to trust again. Here's what cuts the deepest. They often don't see it as a second betrayal at all. In their mind, you forgave them. The slate was clean. They got a fresh start. They don't realize that forgiveness wasn't a reset button. It was an investment of hope you made, a bet you placed on them being different. When they repeat the pattern, that bet goes bad, and you lose more than you did the first time because you lost something harder to rebuild, your belief that people can actually change. The real trap sits here. Forgiving someone doesn't change them. It only changes how you feel about what they did. If what made them do it the first time is still alive inside them, the impulse, the weakness, the selfishness, nothing stopped them from doing it again except their own choice to do the work, and they didn't make it. So before you forgive, sit with a question that matters. Are you forgiving because they've actually changed or because you're betting they will? There's a chasm between those two, and your peace depends on knowing which one you're actually choosing. Loyalty without honesty is control. You know the person who says they'd do anything for you, who checks in constantly, who knows where you are, who gets hurt when you make plans without telling them first. That feeling of being watched over can feel like care at first. It isn't. It's a cage dressed up in devotion. Real loyalty doesn't need surveillance. Real loyalty doesn't demand you report your movements or explain your choices or prove you're not betraying it by having a separate life. When someone says they're loyal but they won't tell you the truth, won't name the resentment building under their smile, won't admit they're angry, won't say directly that they need something from you, they're not being loyal. They're keeping score. They're building a case. They're storing ammunition for the moment you fail to meet an expectation you never knew existed. You feel it in the texture of the relationship, a tightness, a low hum of anxiety, the sense that you're always slightly failing. That's control-wearing loyalty's mask. The person who truly has your back says the hard thing now, not the soft thing that turns into a weapon later. They tell you when you're wrong. They name what they need. They let you actually choose them instead of trapping you with guilt and obligation. After betrayal, you learn to recognize this specific pattern because you've lived inside it long enough to feel the difference. The loyalty that doesn't allow disagreement, that punishes independence, that demands you prove yourself over and over, that was never loyalty at all. It was a transaction where you were supposed to trade your autonomy for the illusion of safety. Freedom inside a relationship, the kind where you can breathe without permission, is the truest sign someone actually loves you. Old friends betray for status. Remember the friend who ate gas station pizza in your apartment when neither of you had much, who actually listened when you needed it? Then something shifted. They got the promotion, the partner, the invite to the right dinner. Your calls started hitting voicemail. Your stories stopped landing. You weren't a mirror of who they were becoming anymore. You were proof of who they used to be, and proof is liability when you're rebranding yourself. The cruelest part isn't the sudden distance. It's watching them rewrite the story so it's your fault for not growing fast enough, not achieving enough, not fitting the person they're now pretending to be. They need new friends the way fashion requires new clothes, because old ones carry the stain of their origins, and origins are evidence. What makes this betrayal sting in a way others don't is the mathematics of it. You showed up before they had anything to offer. You loved them when loving them meant nothing except that you chose to. But loyalty, you discover too late, is only currency when it flows upward in their mind. You stay useful as long as you validate their ascent, but the second you become weight, you're jettisoned. The hard truth, people who once needed you don't always become people who value you. Sometimes they just become people who cannot afford to remember needing anyone at all. Watch for the friend who measures connection by what it does for them, who keeps old photos but erases your number. They're not being cruel, they're being efficient. And that efficiency might wound you more than cruelty ever could, because at least cruelty says you mattered. Efficiency pretends you never existed at all. Betrayal feels like stolen time. You know that feeling when you realize someone lied to you for months and suddenly every memory with them rewrites itself? Every late night you stayed up listening to their problems, every time you rearranged your schedule, every ounce of patience you poured into them. It all gets a date stamped on it. Not the date it happened, but the date you found out it meant something different than you thought. That's the theft. It's not just about what they did, it's about what you did and for whom. Betrayal doesn't just wound the present, it poisons the past, and somehow that feels worse than either alone. You can't get those hours back. You can't unknow what you now know about their character. And the cruelest part is that you don't even feel the full weight of it at first. You only feel it later, in small waves, when you're scrolling and land on a photo from that time, or someone mentions their name, or you realize you're still angry 3 years later. The anger isn't even about the lie itself anymore. It's about the fact that you gave time to someone who didn't deserve it, who was already betraying you while you were still choosing to believe. That's the real wound. Not the betrayal in a single moment, but the betrayal of all the moments you chose to give them. So when you're rebuilding trust with anyone, including yourself, you're not just checking whether they're honest now. You're protecting your time. You're protecting the hours you can't get back, the irreplaceable currency of your own life. And that protective instinct, that wariness, that's not paranoia. That's you learning to respect the only thing you truly own, the finite number of days you have left to give. The bite of betrayal isn't the lie. It's knowing you'll never get back the version of yourself who believed them. Loyalty is a discipline, not a feeling. You wake up one morning and the warmth is gone. That automatic yes, the charge, the effortless pull toward someone. and you panic because you learned somewhere that loyalty lives in the chest, in butterflies and pure devotion, and without it, you assume the whole thing is already dead. But betrayal teaches you something sharp. You've been confusing loyalty with infatuation the entire time. Feelings are weather. They spike and crash like fever. They arrive and vanish on their own schedule. Loyalty is something else. It's the foundation you pour, whether the storm is raging or the sky is clear. When your closest person disappoints you, you feel it immediately. The feeling evaporates. What remains is the choice, and that choice, repeated 100 unremarkable times in 100 forgettable moments, is where real loyalty lives. It's showing up on Tuesday when Tuesday feels like nothing. It's keeping a promise when keeping it costs you and nobody's watching to applaud you. It's texting back with care when you're running on fumes instead of firing off rage. Feelings make loyalty easy. They seduce you into thinking you're noble when you're just riding a high. Discipline is where actual nobility exists, because discipline means you're staying put when you could leave, believing when you could doubt, choosing the person over the feeling. After betrayal, most people think loyalty is dead, but they're really just noticing that they finally have to build it instead of riding it like a current. That's harder. That's also the only real thing. People who can choose loyalty like a daily practice, like brushing teeth, like showing up even when the tremor is gone, those people become the ones worth staying loyal to. You defended people who wouldn't defend you. There's a moment most people miss until it's too late, when you realize you spent energy protecting someone's reputation while they sat silent when yours needed it. Not because they didn't notice, because defending you didn't serve them. Maybe it would have cost them something. Maybe it would have complicated things. Maybe they just didn't love you enough to take the hit. The asymmetry is brutal once you see it. You showed up in rooms and corrected lies about them. You explained their bad behavior to hurt people. You gave them the benefit of the doubt when everyone else was sharpening knives. And when the roles flipped, when someone said something unkind about you within earshot, you waited. You watched to see if they'd do the same. Most don't. The silence in those moments is deafening because it answers a question you didn't want to ask. You mattered less than the comfort of staying quiet. What makes this thing worse is that you can't even blame them for the asymmetry. Not honestly, you chose to show up for them. They didn't ask you to. You interpreted loyalty as something you gave first, hoping they'd match the temperature. But loyalty doesn't work that way. It's not a debt that gets called due. It's a mutual choice to be on each other's side, regardless of cost. If only one person is willing to pay the price, then only one person is being loyal. The other one is just accepting a gift they never returned. The truth you learn after betrayal is this: defending people is not the same as being defended. One is something you do. The other is something that happens to you, only if someone chooses to make it happen. And that choice tells you everything about whether you were ever truly theirs. Betrayal clarifies who actually mattered. You know that moment after the knife lands when you're lying there trying to piece together what just happened? That's when the fog clears. Suddenly, you can see exactly who showed up, not with advice or judgment, but with actual presence. Maybe it's the friend who didn't ask for the story. Maybe it's the colleague who just dropped off coffee at your door. Maybe it's the person you barely knew from spin class who texted, "I'm here," and just as clearly, you see the people who went quiet, not out of malice, just out of distance. They were never close enough to matter anyway, but you couldn't feel that distance until your hands were shaking. Before the betrayal, you were probably operating on a hazy social map, assuming closeness that wasn't really there, spreading your trust across a wide surface of people who liked you fine but weren't actually your people. Betrayal burns away that confusion. It turns your relationship roster into two lists, and the second list is brutally short. What's stranger is that you don't regret the people on that short list anymore. You stop waiting for them to reach out. You stop explaining yourself to them. You stop hoping they'll suddenly understand why this mattered. Instead, you pour yourself into the 4 or 5 who didn't hesitate, the people who sat in the wreckage with you without needing to be asked. Loyalty, it turns out, was never about quantity or history or how long you'd known someone. It was always about who would show up when showing up cost them something. The betrayal didn't change who those people were. It just removed all the noise so you could finally see them clearly. And that clarity, painful as it is, becomes the most reliable map you'll ever have. Loyalty shrinks under pressure. Watch what happens when someone you trust faces a real cost for keeping their word, not a small inconvenience. I mean, losing money, risking their job, facing public shame, or choosing between you and their own survival. Most people, if they are honest in that moment, feel the loyalty they swore was permanent suddenly become negotiable. It is not weakness, it is math. When the pressure gets high enough, loyalty becomes a luxury, and survival becomes the math that matters. You see this in office politics when someone who called you a friend stays silent while you're being fired. You see it in families when a relative sides with the person who has more money or power. You see it in friendships that evaporate the second supporting you costs something real: reputation, time, energy, stability. The betrayal is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet. They do not betray you with cruelty. They simply fade or get busy or decide you are not worth the squeeze. And here is what makes it harder to forgive. They do not think of it as disloyalty. In their mind, they did the reasonable thing. They protected themselves. Everyone does it. Except you thought they were different. You thought your bond was strong enough to withstand the pressure. And maybe it was, until it was not. The brutal lesson is not that people are selfish. It is that loyalty has a breaking point, and it is usually lower than you think. So when choosing who to trust with something that matters, do not ask whether they love you. Ask whether they can afford to keep the faith. Because the person who stands by you when it costs them nothing is not loyal. They're just comfortable. The one who stays when the pressure is on, that is the one worth knowing. People honor loyalty they profit from. That friend who suddenly became your shadow when you landed the job with corner office potential or inherited money or knew people worth knowing, did you notice how the text thinned the moment your circumstances flattened? You were not imagining it. Loyalty does not float in abstraction. It lives in what someone actually does. And what people actually do correlates almost perfectly with what they gain from it. Your colleague will defend you in a meeting because your win makes their department shine. Your family member will remember your birthday because you are the one throwing the holidays everyone wants to attend. Your romantic partner will speak your name with warmth because you are still filling a hole in their life. None of this makes them monsters. It makes them ordinary. The transaction itself is not evil. It is just honest in a way we rarely admit. And then the equation shifts. The job ends, the connections fade, the money quiets, the role passes to someone else, and watch what happens to the honor. They do not suddenly hate you. They simply stop profiting from the arrangement. And loyalty without profit is just labor, and labor requires motivation most people do not carry. The brutal part is not that they left. It is that you already knew somewhere inside that they would. The reframe is not to become hardened or to build walls everywhere. It is to stop being gutted when it happens, to stop calling it betrayal when it is just the end of a transaction, and to ask yourself one sharper question instead. Who in my life is loyal to me when there is nothing in it for them? Those people are the anomaly. When you find them, you have found something close to real. Rebuilt trust is never identical. You believe it's possible the moment someone says they want to earn your trust back. You nod. You mean it. And somewhere underneath, you're hoping the old thing might just reassemble itself if you both work hard enough. Like a vase glued back together that somehow becomes whole again. It won't. Not because they can't change, and not because you can't forgive, but because the version of trust you had before lived in a world where betrayal hadn't happened yet, and that world is gone now. You can't unknow what you learned about them, about yourself, about how quickly solid ground can crack beneath you. What rebuilds instead is different. It's smaller at first, more careful, constructed on entirely different ground rules than the original. It has names now. I need you to tell me where you are. Answer by 8. I'm not ready to meet their friends yet. Conditions the old trust didn't require because it had the luxury of blind faith. The new thing is thinner in some ways, thicker in others. You're more honest about what you actually need, less willing to pretend things are fine when they aren't. Some people can't live in that smaller, realer space. They want to be believed the way they were before, without conditions or checkpoints or lingering doubt. They confuse your refusal to pretend with your refusal to try, but they're missing it. You're not refusing to rebuild. You're refusing to rebuild false. The second version might actually be stronger because it's no longer carrying the weight of fantasy. It won't look like the first one. It will look like something that was actually earned. And if they stay long enough to learn the shape of it, they'll realize that's the only version worth having.